Pia Chamberlain, 28, one of the world's rare noses in the world, who could identify 1,000 scents blindfolded, who could smell fear, lies and desire on human skin. But tonight, she couldn't smell double betrayal until it was too late. Backstage at Fashion Week, cameras flashing, her fiancé standing beside the boss's daughter, holding her hand, presenting Pia's formula as their own. 4 years of work. Stolen. Pia stood frozen, tears sliding down her cheeks, watching her life's work slip through her fingers. But she wasn't the only one watching. In the shadows, a man stood perfectly still. The ghost collector. Ice-cold billionaire, heir to a criminal empire, and hunter of forgotten scents. Extinct flowers, illegal resins, fragrances that existed only in memory. A man who moved through underground markets from Istanbul to Marrakesh, driven by a single obsession, to find the scent that could mend a broken soul. And tonight, Pia is about to hit the turning point of her life, and the road she chooses will carry her from New York to France, from Istanbul, all the way to Paris. A mysterious man with secrets, a groundbreaking perfume, that must be completed, and a love so intense it might ruin them both. Leon Martin, 40 years old, son of one of New York's most powerful mafia families. For 20 years he'd watched her from the shadows, and tonight he was done watching. Pia stood in the wings, her fingers gripping the velvet curtain. Stage lights blazed beyond, and through the gap she watched Derek and Vanessa Cole step into the spotlight, hand in hand. Cameras flashed as Vanessa lifted her wrist toward the microphones and announced Éclat Noir, her voice bright with triumph. The scent drifted backstage, and Pia's trained nose caught every note. Bergamot and blackcurrant, rose absolute and jasmine sambac, orris root and sandalwood with ambergris underneath. Every molecule hers, every note stolen. Her throat closed as the crowd erupted in applause, as Vanessa smiled and Derek wrapped his arm around her waist like they'd created this together, like Pia had never existed. She turned away from the stage and pushed through the backstage corridor, her heels clicking against concrete, needing air, needing to be anywhere but here. A scent stopped her mid-step. Not éclat noir, not hairspray or stage lights. Something else entirely. Vetiver, deep and ancient. A whisper of bergamot, wooden smoke, clinging to warm skin. And underneath it all, nothing. No fear, no desire, no guilt. Just absence where emotion should leave chemical traces. The refusal to be read. Pia's blood went cold. In years of reading people through their chemistry, she had never encountered anyone whose emotions she couldn't smell. Everyone leaked. Everyone broadcast their inner state through pheromones, and the alchemy of feeling made physical. It was involuntary, unstoppable. Until now. She turned slowly. A man emerged from the darkness, moving toward her with deliberate, measured steps. Tall, over 6 feet, dark suit that absorbed the dim light. Half his face remained in shadow, half catching the backstage glow. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, something gleaming at his throat. He stopped 3 feet away and turned his head toward the stage where Vanessa and Derek still basked in applause. Light fell across his face fully now, and Pia's breath caught. Green-blue eyes like winter storms, and running from his collarbone up his neck, a scar, puckered and shiny, an old severe burn that disappeared under his jaw. Then those storm-colored eyes turned to her. "Your heart is burning." His voice was low and rough, like gravel wrapped in velvet, "but it will pass." Pia couldn't speak, couldn't move. He stepped closer, near enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, near enough that his scent reached her. Vetiver deep and ancient, a whisper of bergamot, wooden smoke clinging to warm skin. Do you want revenge, or do you want to become something they can never touch? He withdrew a card from his jacket and held it out between them. "Find me." Pia took the card with trembling fingers. Heavy cream stock, an address in Grasse, the perfume capital of southern France. One handwritten line beneath. 1 week. Bring your gift. When she looked up, he was already gone, swallowed by the backstage maze, leaving only that haunting scent hanging in the air. The applause was still echoing when Pia found them backstage in the VIP lounge. Derek held a champagne flute like a trophy while Vanessa scrolled through her phone on the white leather couch, both of them comfortable and victorious. "Congratulations," Pia's voice cut through the room, "on stealing my formula." Derek's practiced smile faltered. "Pia, come on, it was collaborative work. My notes, my burned hands, my formulas." Her voice shook with rage. "You copied everything and gave it to her." Vanessa stood slowly, taller and more polished, her expression ice. "Prove it. Show me your patents, your copyrights, your signed contracts." Pia opened her mouth and closed it. The notes were in Derek's files, the work done in Derek's studio, everything under Derek's name because she'd trusted him. "That's what I thought." Vanessa's lips curved. "You were an assistant, a talented one, but Éclat Noir is mine. If you continue making accusations without proof, my father's lawyers will bury you." Derek stepped closer, his voice dropping. "I gave you a job when no one else would, access to materials you could never afford. You think you're special? You're not unique, you're just useful, and that usefulness has run its course." Pia searched for it, the sour note of deception, the bitter edge of guilt, but Derek's scent was a wall of expensive cologne and self-righteousness, nothing underneath, nothing she could read. "That's the problem," she realized. "I couldn't read him. I never could. And I trusted him anyway." She stepped back, chest tight, vision blurring. "Keep it. Keep everything. I'm done." She turned and walked out, and behind her Vanessa laughed, light and careless, already moving on. "Never again," Pia swore to herself. "Never trust someone I can't read." Pia sat on the floor of her empty apartment, counting the bills in her hand. $212, and rent was $1,800. 1 month since Fashion Week. Vanessa's father, Marcus Cole, had made sure every door in the industry slammed shut, and Derek had erased her like she'd never existed. She pulled the card from her pocket, worn soft from weeks of handling. Grasse, France, a phone number in sharp handwriting. "This is insane," she murmured. She knew nothing about him except shadows and scars, and a voice that promised things she couldn't name, a man she couldn't read, and she'd sworn to herself never to trust someone she couldn't read, but $200 wouldn't last the week. She dialed, and after 3 rings the line clicked open to silence. No greeting, no acknowledgement, just the sound of breathing on the other end, patient and unhurried, as if he'd been waiting for this call all along. "This is Pia Chamberlain." She swallowed hard. I accept your offer." The silence stretched for 3 long heartbeats, and then the line went dead without a single word. Her phone buzzed almost instantly. A flight confirmation to Marseille, first class, departing tomorrow morning, followed by 1 line. "Driver will collect you. Bring nothing but yourself. Lavender." Endless purple stretching to the horizon, the fragrance so thick Pia could taste it, sweet and herbal and ancient, the smell of 1,000 summers pressed into the air. The car turned onto a gravel driveway lined with cypress trees, and the chateau appeared. Weathered stone walls, slate roof, ivy climbing the facade. Old, solid, the kind of place that kept secrets for centuries. The front door opened before she could knock. A woman emerged, 60 or older, silver hair in a neat bun, floral apron, face lined with years of laughter. "Mademoiselle Chamberlain, welcome. I am Hélène." Thick Provençal accent. "Come, you must be tired. Monsieur Martin will see you at 7. Inside was cool and dim. Polished wood floors, whitewashed walls, furniture older than her grandmother. The lavender followed her in, mixing with beeswax and something else underneath. Vetiver deep and ancient. A whisper of bergamot, wooden smoke. Him, soaked into the very stones. "He lives here," she realized. "This whole place smells like him." The library door stood open. Leon Martin stood by the window, back to the room, one hand in his pocket. Evening light gilded his silhouette, catching the edges of dark hair swept back from his forehead. He didn't turn when she entered. Books lined the walls floor to ceiling, old leather spines and faded gilt catching the last of the daylight. Two wing-back chairs sat angled toward the window, with a crystal decanter and two glasses on the low table between them. Sit. One word. Command, not invitation. Pia's legs moved before her mind caught up, and she lowered herself into the nearest chair, hands clasped tight in her lap to hide their trembling. He remained at the window, letting the silence stretch until her skin prickled, and she had to resist the urge to fill it with words. Outside, the lavender fields glowed purple in the fading light. Still, he didn't move. Finally, he turned. The breath left her lungs. Taller than she remembered, over 6 feet, in a black shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows and collar open. Dark hair, thick and immaculately groomed, swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, green-blue eyes burning with quiet intensity. And the scar, running from his collarbone up his neck, disappearing under his jaw, puckered and shiny, an old severe burn that told a story she desperately wanted to know. He crossed to the opposite chair with the kind of controlled grace that spoke of danger held in check, and lowered himself into it without breaking eye contact. He poured 2 whiskies, the amber liquid catching the last rays of sunset, and slid one toward her across the polished table. You came. Pia wrapped her fingers around the glass but didn't drink, needing something to hold on to. You didn't give me much choice. Leon's mouth curved at one corner, not quite a smile, something more dangerous. There's always a choice, yet here you are. She had no answer that wouldn't reveal too much, so she said nothing. Leon lifted his glass and studied the amber liquid for a long moment, swirling it slowly, and when he looked up, his gaze pinned her like a butterfly to a board. You're angry. Pia's fingers tightened around the glass, knuckles whitening. Of course I'm angry. Leon took a slow sip, savoring it, before setting the glass down with a soft click. Good. The ones who've given up don't feel it anymore. The words hit something raw inside her, and Pia looked away, staring out the window. Because meeting his gaze felt too much like staring into the sun, the silence stretched. When he finally spoke again, his voice had dropped lower. 6 months. You work for me. Recreate a fragrance I've been searching for. Pia turned back to face him, curiosity winning over caution. What fragrance? Leon held her gaze, and something shifted in his expression, a crack in the mask there and gone, one that ends pain. She frowned, her professional mind already rejecting the premise. That's not possible. Fragrances can evoke memory, emotion, but they can't end pain. Leon's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement. What if you're wrong? He leaned forward, elbows on knees, bringing his face close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in those blue-green eyes. What if there's a scent that makes people feel safe, that triggers belonging, comfort, home? I have the formula, incomplete. I need your nose to finish it. Her pulse kicked up, the perfumer in her already intrigued, despite everything. You stay here, he continued. Work in my laboratory. Don't leave without permission. Don't contact your old life. Pia stiffened, her fingers curling into fists against her thighs. That sounds like captivity. Leon didn't blink. Protection. A pause, waited. His eyes bored into hers. And I know you've been trying to read me since we met. Heat flooded her face, sudden and unwelcome, because he was right. You can't. Not a question, a statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. That terrifies you. She wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. From that first moment backstage, she'd been trying to decipher him, but underneath his scent there was nothing. No fear, no guilt, no desire. Just absence, where emotion should leave traces. Everyone had a scent signature. Everyone told their secrets through their skin. Everyone except him. Who are you, really? The whisper escaped before she could stop it. Leon rose from his chair in one fluid movement, and Pia's heart stuttered as he walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold, one hand on the frame, and looked back over his shoulder. Those storm-colored eyes found hers and held them. The question isn't who I am. It's who you'll become. Then he was gone, his footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving her alone with the fading light and untouched whiskey, and a pulse that thrummed in her veins like a warning or a promise or a... Pia lay staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The contract sat on the nightstand, thick paper, 6 months in black ink, unsigned. Outside, night breathed with crickets and wind through lavender, and underneath it all, that scent, bergamot, vetiver, old books. Him. A soft knock. "Mademoiselle?" Helene's voice. "May I?" "Yes." Helene entered with tea, porcelain rattling softly. She poured without asking. "Chamomile, lavender, honey, for sleep. Thank you." Pia accepted the cup, warmth seeping into her palms. Helene lingered by the door, expression thoughtful. "You wonder about him?" Pia nodded. "Monsieur Léon is difficult. He doesn't let people close, hasn't for years, but he's not cruel, just wounded." She paused. "The scar, 20 years ago. A fire. He tried to save someone, nearly died himself. But he was too late." Pia's chest tightened. "Who?" "That's his story to tell." Helene moved to the door. "But you're the first person he's brought here in years. That means something." She left before Pia could ask anything else. The contract waited. Pia picked it up, read it again. 6 months. Resources. Protection. At the bottom, handwritten in that same sharp script, "Your gift deserves to be seen." Pia set it down, reached for the pen, hesitated, then signed. Leon was already seated when Pia entered the dining room. He didn't look up from the document before him, black coffee at his elbow, morning light catching the sharp planes of his face and the dark hair swept back from his forehead. "Sit." Pia crossed to the table and lowered herself into the chair across from him. The table was set simply. Bread, cheese, fruit, coffee. Her stomach growled, but she didn't reach for anything, too aware of his presence to eat. Leon glanced up, his gaze sweeping over her face. "You signed." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Good." He returned to his document, dismissing her as easily as one might dismiss a servant. Pia poured herself coffee, the bitter aroma grounding her, and waited. The silence stretched. Outside, the lavender fields shimmered in the morning heat. "We start today," he said finally, setting the document aside. "But first, I need to see what you can do." He crossed to a cabinet against the wall and returned with a small wooden box. He set it before her and opened the lid. 6 glass vials, no labels, nestled in velvet. "Identify them, top notes to base, in order." Pia picked up the first vial, uncapped it, inhaled. Her mind clicked into professional mode, the anxiety fading as instinct took over. Bergamot, Calabrian, fresh crop under 6 months. She moved methodically through the remaining vials, barely pausing between each one. Neroli, Tunisian, steam distilled. Rosa de Mai from Grasse. Jasmine Sambac from India. Oak moss, real not synthetic. Ambergris, natural, 10 years aged minimum. She set the last vial down and looked up. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps approval. "Time?" Pia glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at him. 18 seconds. Leon set down his coffee cup, studying her with new interest. Most noses need 2 minutes. Something shifted in the air between them. Respect, perhaps, or reassessment. Pia held his gaze, refusing to look away. "I'm not most noses." A real smile this time, brief but genuine, and it transformed his face for just a moment before the mask slid back into place. "No, you're not." He closed the box and returned it to the cabinet. When he turned back, his expression had shifted to something unreadable. He moved toward her, slow and deliberate. Pia's breath caught. He was too close now, standing directly in front of where she sat, tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. His scent reached her, vetiver deep and ancient, a whisper of bergamot, wooden smoke. "Stand up," he said quietly. She stood on unsteady legs, and suddenly the space between them felt impossibly small. He took another step forward. Pia stepped back instinctively, her spine hitting the edge of the table. Trapped. Leon kept moving until there were mere inches between them, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that his breath stirred the loose strands of hair at her temple. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "Is he going to touch me?" Then Leon reached past her, his arm brushing her shoulder, and pulled open the drawer behind her. The movement brought him even closer, his chest nearly touching hers. This close, her trained nose caught everything beneath the fragrance. His skin, warm, masculine, something uniquely him that made her head spin because it felt familiar somehow, like her body recognized something her mind couldn't name. She still couldn't read his emotions, couldn't find fear or desire or anything in the chemical traces, but this raw human scent was unmistakably real. She found herself staring at his jaw, just centimeters away, following the line of that old burn scar as it traveled from his collarbone up his neck. Up close, she could see the puckered texture, evidence of how close he'd come to dying. For someone. Leon withdrew a thick folder from the drawer and stepped back, putting professional distance between them once more. His expression gave nothing away. "The workshop, 10 minutes. Don't be late." He walked to the door and paused, looking back over his shoulder. "And Pia?" She couldn't speak. "You're mine now. For 6 months. No other perfume house, no other company." He paused and something darker moved through his gaze. "And I don't want you contacting anyone from your old life, especially not other men." The words landed like a brand. Pia opened her mouth to protest. Who does he think he is? But he was already gone, his footsteps fading down the corridor. She stood frozen, pulse racing, the ghost of his scent still clinging to her skin. 6 months, trapped in a chateau with a man she couldn't read. Am I in trouble? She thought. Something told her she already knew the answer. 10 minutes later, Pia followed Leon through corridors that smelled of beeswax and lavender. He walked fast, not checking if she could keep up. White linen shirt, dark green trousers, a leather bracelet on his wrist. She catalogued him without meaning to. Professional habit. His watch was simple but expensive. His shoes, Italian. Late August light caught him as they passed a window. Dark hair, light olive skin, tanned by summer. When he glanced back, his blue-green eyes held that same unreadable depth. His gaze swept over her briefly, the white linen sundress she'd found in the wardrobe this morning, the sandals that fit perfectly. Everything in that closet had been her size, as if he'd known she was coming. The scar was there too, above his collar, disappearing into the white linen. His voice echoed in the stone corridor, low, certain, attractive in a way she refused to acknowledge. Pia tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear and kept walking. No makeup, no armor, just her face, her long lashes, her wide brown eyes that gave away too much. Just a job. 6 months. Then back to real life. They descended a stone staircase into what must have been wine cellars once, but when Leon pushed open the heavy wooden door, Pia stopped. The workshop was a cathedral of scent. Thousands of glass bottles lined the walls, amber, cobalt, crystal. Antique copper stills gleamed near high windows. A massive wooden table dominated the center, covered in beakers and blotting paper. "Oh gosh," she breathed. "This is everything you need." Leon moved to the table. "Some essences here are extinct. Some so rare only 3 people have access." He picked up a small vial, turned it in the light. Turkish Rose Absolute from the 1950s. Mysore sandalwood harvested before the trade ban. Real ambergris aged 20 years. Pia's hands trembled as she reached for a bottle. This wasn't just a workshop. This was history. concentrated and preserved. The top shelf. Don't touch those without me. They're irreplaceable. She followed his gaze to the highest row of bottles, amber and ancient, and nodded. Leon pulled a leather-bound notebook from a drawer and set it on the table. The formula I mentioned last night, it's all here. Pia opened it, pages filled with tight, precise handwriting, molecular structures, failed attempts crossed out, notes in the margins. You've been working on this for years, she said quietly. 6 years. His jaw tightened. And I'm no closer than when I started. She studied the base structure, the bones of what he was trying to create, healing and desire, woven together. Something's missing, Leon said. The element that bridges memory and desire, pain and pleasure. He looked at her. That's where you come in. Pia's mind was already racing through molecular possibilities. Why me? She asked. Really? Why not one of the other noses? Leon studied her for a long moment. His expression didn't soften, but something calculated moved behind his eyes. Because you can smell things others can't. Not just scents, emotions, fear, lies, desire, guilt. He stepped closer, and Pia's pulse kicked up automatically. I've watched you work, Pia. You read people through their chemical signatures. That ability will help you understand what this fragrance needs to become. Watched me work. The words sent ice down her spine. How long? How closely? She wanted to ask, but he'd already turned away, reaching for a bottle on the upper shelf. Without thinking, Pia stepped closer. Inhaled, professional habit. She read everyone this way, their chemistry, their secrets, the truth beneath the cologne. It was automatic, like breathing. She bypassed the familiar notes of his fragrance and searched deeper, for the skin beneath. There, masculine, dark. A warmth that was almost sweet in a way that made her want to lean closer. Her mouth went dry. But where emotion should live, nothing. A wall of silence where fear or desire or anything human should be. Leon spun around. His face was inches from hers. Surprise flickered across his features, then something darker. His nostrils flared slightly. Are you smelling me? Pia's back hit the table. She hadn't realized she'd retreated. Leon took a step forward, then another, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue-green eyes. Like a she-wolf, he murmured, studying her face. You were smelling me, weren't you? Her heart hammered. She should apologize, should look away. Instead, she lifted her chin. I smell everything, Mr. Martin. It's what you're paying me for. The corner of his mouth lifted, just barely, but she caught it. He reached toward her face. Pia froze. His fingers brushed her hair, gentle, and pulled away, holding a small leaf, lavender, from the fields outside. Call me Leon. He let the leaf fall to the floor. We'll be alone together for a long time. Let's skip the formalities. He turned back to the shelves as if nothing had happened. Pia exhaled slowly, her pulse still racing. She hadn't been able to read him, not even a fragment. Just that wall of nothing where his emotions should be. But he had read her perfectly. That terrified her more than anything. Something wrong? His voice cut through her confusion. He was watching her with that unreadable expression, but the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile, almost satisfaction. He knows I'm trying to read him, and he knows I can't. No, she said quickly. Nothing. Leon held her gaze for 3 heartbeats too long. Good. We start now. I'll show you the current formula. You'll tell me what it's missing. He moved away, pulling bottles from shelves with practiced efficiency, and Pia exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. This was just work. Professional. Scientific. She almost believed it. But as she watched him move through his workshop, like a predator in his territory, one thought wouldn't leave her alone. He can hide everything from me. But can I hide anything from him? 5 days passed in a rhythm that felt both structured and dreamlike. Mornings began with silent breakfasts. Leon appeared at 7 sharp, already dressed in linen shirts and trousers, his expression unreadable behind black coffee. Pia tried making conversation the first 2 mornings, comments about the weather, questions about the chateau's history. He didn't respond, just lifted his coffee cup and drank. By the second day, she stopped trying. By 8, they were in the workshop. Leon would present essences, watch her work, occasionally offer corrections in that low, rough voice. His instructions came clipped and direct. Again. No. Concentrate. Never praise, never encouragement, just relentless, exacting standards. When he was deep in thought, he'd roll his sleeves higher, exposing forearms corded with muscle. Pia learned to look away when he did that. She tested combinations, made notes, adjusted ratios. The base formula was extraordinary, complex and layered, shifting on skin in unexpected ways. But something still eluded them both, the bridge between memory and desire. What confused her most was Leon himself. In the workshop, she caught glimpses of something warmer, the way he leaned closer when she identified a rare essence correctly, the brief softening around his eyes when she suggested a combination he hadn't considered. Once, he'd almost smiled, but outside the workshop, he was ice, silent breakfasts, empty dinners, corridors where he passed her without a word, as if they were strangers. Two different men. She couldn't reconcile them. Lunches were simple. Helene brought bread, cheese, fruit to the workshop. They ate at opposite ends of the table, Pia pretending to read her notes while hyper-aware of every movement Leon made. Dinners, Leon didn't attend. Monsieur prefers solitude in the evenings, Helene explained the first night. He works late. By the third night, Pia stopped expecting him. She couldn't remember the last time someone had touched her. Real touch, not Derek's calculated caresses that always wanted something, not the hollow gestures of a man already sleeping with someone else. Maybe that's why Leon's accidental brush in the workshop, reaching for the same vial, fingers meeting for half a second, had sent heat rushing through her like a fever. She spent evenings walking the lavender fields, the purple rose stretching endlessly under darkening sky. The chateau felt too big, too quiet. On the 5th night, Helene brought tea and lingered in Pia's doorway. "The west wing is Monsieur's private area," she said gently. "He prefers no one enters without permission." Pia nodded, though curiosity burned in her chest. What was Leon hiding there? But she didn't ask. Some doors stayed closed for a reason. That evening, Leon paused at the workshop doorway. She was still there, bent over her notes, dark hair falling across her face, the last August light turning her skin to gold. Her white dress glowed against the amber bottles behind her. She didn't know he was watching. He told himself he was checking her progress, that this was professional interest, nothing more. But he stood there longer than necessary, and when he finally turned away, something tight had settled in his chest. Helene was waiting in the corridor. She said nothing, but she smiled. The second week began differently. Pia was walking toward the workshop when she heard Leon's voice drifting from the library. French, rapid and low, with an edge that needed no translation. This wasn't the man who gave her one-word instructions over breakfast. This was someone who made threats without raising his voice, someone people feared. The conversation ended. Silence fell over the corridor. Pia walked quickly toward the workshop, her pulse unsteady. She'd barely sat down when Leon appeared in the doorway, an hour later than usual. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, filling the frame with that particular stillness of his. His gaze found her immediately. She pretended to write something, while the silence stretched between them. Then he was beside her, close enough that she felt his presence before she saw him. He reached past her to pick up the vial she'd been working on, her formula. Pia looked up. His eyes were different today, harder, with something burning beneath the surface. He uncapped the vial without breaking her gaze, and his free hand came up slowly to brush her hair aside, exposing the curve of her neck. "What are you doing?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Testing." He dipped his finger into the vial, one drop, golden on his fingertip, and touched it to her neck, just below her ear, the liquid cool against her heated skin. "It's not ready yet." "I know," Leon murmured. Then, slowly, so slowly she could have stopped him, he lifted his hand again. His fingertip, still damp with fragrance, found the pulse point at her throat. "Now we wait." Leon murmured. 30 seconds for the top notes. But he didn't step back. He stood there watching her neck, and Pia's heartbeat kicked hard against her ribs. She could feel his presence like gravity pulling her toward him. He leaned in. Pia's breath caught as Leon brought his face close to her throat, so close she could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin. Not touching, not quite, but near enough that every nerve ending in her body screamed. He inhaled slowly, deliberately. Oh gosh. He was smelling her, reading the fragrance's development on her skin the way only a true perfumer could, with proximity, with intimacy. Bergamot, he whispered against her neck. Bright. Another breath. Neroli. Jasmine, blooming too fast. His hand moved to her shoulder, thumb pressing into the hollow above her collarbone. Your skin is changing it. His voice had dropped rougher. The musk is emerging. That shouldn't happen for hours. Maybe I'm... Her voice broke. Maybe I'm reacting to it. Leon pulled back just enough to look at her face. His eyes dropped to her flushed cheeks, to her chest, rising and falling too fast. You are, he said quietly, but not just the fragrance. It wasn't a question. Pia should deny it, should pull away, should remember this was professional. Instead, she turned her head, swallowed hard. The answer was written all over her body anyway. Leon's hand moved from her shoulder to cup the side of her neck, his thumb coming to rest against her wildly beating pulse. This, he said softly, is what I needed to know. Then he stepped back, releasing her so abruptly that Pia swayed in her chair. He walked to the far side of the workshop and put the entire length of the table between them. When he spoke again, his voice was perfectly controlled, as if the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. That's enough for today. He left without looking back. Pia sat, frozen, her hand pressed to her neck where his thumb had been, where the fragrance still bloomed on her overheated skin. What the hell was that? And why? Did she already want it to happen again? That morning, Pia woke before dawn, too restless to sleep, too aware of the silence pressing against the chateau walls. She dressed quickly and slipped outside, heading for the lavender fields where the air was cool and the purple rose stretched endlessly in the early light. She walked between the blooms, trailing her fingers through the flowers, letting their scent quiet her racing thoughts. That's when she felt it, that prickling awareness of being watched. Anxiety buzzed under her skin like bees. Pia stopped and turned slowly toward the chateau. Most windows were shuttered, curtains drawn against the morning, but one window on the second floor stood open, and in that window, Leon. He stood perfectly still, one hand braced against the frame, watching her. Control radiated from him without effort. Even from this distance she could feel the weight of his gaze. He didn't wave, didn't look away, didn't pretend he hadn't been caught. Just stood there, watching her walk through his lavender fields like he'd been doing it for days, maybe weeks. Her stomach tightened. She should look away, should turn back toward the house. Instead, she held his gaze across the lavender, her in the fields, him at his window. She didn't know why. Then Leon stepped back, and the curtain fell closed. Pia stood frozen, skin prickling with something she couldn't name. Unease? Curiosity? She wasn't sure she wanted to know. By noon, Pia was back in the workshop, trying to focus on anything but the image of Leon at that window. She was heating a mixture of essences over a small burner, adjusting the temperature with one hand and scribbling notes with the other, when the alcohol caught. One moment the flame was steady, the next it was licking up the side of the beaker, spreading to the cloth she'd left too close. She grabbed the fire blanket from the wall and smothered it quickly, years of laboratory training kicking in before panic could take hold. The flames died, smoke curled toward the ceiling. She was still catching her breath when Leon burst through the door with a fire extinguisher, his face white. He sprayed foam across the workstation before she could speak, covering everything, the beaker, her notes, half the table, in white chemical snow. "Leon, stop!" Pia held up her hands. "I already put it out, it's fine." But he kept spraying until the canister sputtered empty, his chest heaving, his eyes wild in a way she'd never seen from him. What were you thinking? His voice was ragged, barely controlled. Pia stared at him, stunned by the intensity of his reaction. It was an accident. The alcohol caught. I handled it. Leon's jaw clenched. Something dark flashed in his eyes. Like you handled it in the chemistry lab? The words hung between them like smoke. Pia's blood went cold. Ice water flooded her veins. What did you say? Leon ran a hand through his hair, the gesture sharp with frustration. She watched him realize his mistake. How do you know about that? Her voice shook. That was 8 years ago. Some lab accident back in college that barely made the local paper. Only a handful of people even knew I was involved. Leon didn't answer. That stillness meant something was about to shift. Who are you, Leon Martin? Pia stepped toward him, her fear sharpening into something harder. Her nails dug crescents into her palms. You showed up out of nowhere in New York, handed me a card like you knew exactly who I was, said you'd been following my work. She shook her head. But this is something else. How long have you been watching me? Leon's expression shuttered, all vulnerability vanishing behind cold stone. I ask the questions here, Pia. I don't bring strangers into my home without knowing their history. I can't keep doing this. Her hands trembled. Her spine didn't. You know everything about me, my past, my failures, things nobody should know. And I'm supposed to just trust you. I don't even know who you are. Leon's smile was cold, almost cruel. We're on the verge of something extraordinary, and you need a friend to hold your hand? He tilted his head. No wonder they stole your formula. Red tinged the edges of her vision. The slap happened before Pia knew she was going to do it. The crack echoed through the workshop. Leon's head turned with the force of it, a red mark blooming across his cheek. For a moment, nothing. Then Leon hurled the fire extinguisher across the room. It crashed against the stone wall with a deafening clang. Pia flinched. Her heart slammed against her ribs. He turned back to her, jaw clenched, and stepped forward. 1 step. 2. Until he was close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes. I'm leaving tomorrow morning, she said. Fear showed. Weakness didn't. Leon's hand shot out and caught her wrist. He pulled her close enough that she could see the storm in his eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. No. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. You're not going anywhere. They stood frozen, her wrist in his grip, their faces inches apart. His authority met her defiance. Neither backed down. Then give me one good reason to stay. Pia's voice dropped to a whisper. Mock me again, and I'm gone. I mean it. The moment stretched, thin, dangerous. Then the grip on her wrist loosened. Leon stepped back, 1 step, then 2, putting distance between them like it cost him something. You're staying. His voice was flat, final. Because I say so. Because we have a contract. You want to talk. Tonight. Not now. His gaze dropped to her mouth. Right now, I'm not available. He turned and walked out. Pia stood breathless in the smoke-stained workshop, her wrist still burning where he'd held it. Tonight. He said tonight. Who are you, Leon Martin? And what are you going to tell me about yourself? Hours had passed since the workshop, since the slap, since the fire extinguisher crashing against stone. Pia had spent the afternoon in her room, replaying every word, every look, every moment Leon's hand had closed around her wrist. She'd expected him to send her away, to have Helene drive her to the airport without another word. Instead, she found herself walking into the dining room at 8, uncertain what she'd find. Helene had set the table for one. I prepared everything before I leave, she said, smoothing her apron. Monsieur mentioned he won't be joining. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes catching something over Pia's shoulder. Leon stood in the doorway, a bottle of wine in his hand. Helene's surprise lasted only a moment before she masked it with a small smile. I'll set another place, she murmured, and disappeared toward the kitchen. Pia stayed frozen as Leon crossed the room without a word, pulled out the chair across from hers and sat down. He uncorked the wine with practiced ease, a rich burgundy that filled the air with dark fruit and oak, and poured 2 glasses before sliding one toward her. No apology, no explanation, just wine. This was the first time they'd shared a meal since she arrived. Pia took the glass, watching him over the rim as she sipped. Leon drank too, his gaze steady on her face. The silence between them felt different now, less hostile, more weighted with things unsaid. She was the one who broke it. "You never told me how you got those scars." Leon's hand stilled on his glass. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. "A fire," his voice was flat. "6 months in the hospital." Pia waited. Nothing else came. She pressed gently. "How did it happen?" His jaw tightened. "I don't discuss that." "I'm sorry." She meant it. For pushing, for the slap, for all of it. "I understand better now. Why you reacted the way you did in the workshop." She lifted her gaze and found him watching her with a focus that made heat creep up her neck. "My mother died in a fire too," she said quietly. "I was 8. My aunt raised me after that. She was a chemist. Claire Chamberlain." She paused, searching his face. "Maybe you've heard of her, since you seem to know everything else about me." Leon took a slow sip of wine. "No." One word, too fast, too flat. Pia's instincts prickled, but she pushed the feeling aside. "Look, I'm trying here." Her voice wavered despite herself. "You know everything about me, my past, my failures, that lab accident nobody was supposed to remember. But I don't know anything about you." She blinked back, the sting behind her eyes. "I just want to feel safe. Is that too much to ask?" Leon set down his glass, leaned forward, forearms braced against the table. "I know you, Pia." His voice was low, certain. "You're brilliant. You're talented. You're one of maybe 200 people on this planet who can do what you do." He held her gaze without blinking. "If anyone can complete this fragrance, it's you. And while you're here, you're safe. I won't let anything happen to you." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like another locked door. Leon rose from the table. "Good night." She watched his broad shoulders disappear through the doorway. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. "That's not what I asked," she murmured to the empty room, shaking her head. "I asked about you, Leon Martin. Not me." She stared at the wine in her glass, swirling it absently. "Why won't you let me see who you really are?" The question echoed in the silence of the chateau, unanswered. That night Pia dreamed of lavender fields on fire, purple blooms turning black, smoke rising thick and acrid, a woman's voice calling her name through the flames. She was running, searching, her lungs burning with each breath. The voice grew louder, more desperate. "Pia, Pia, where are you?" She had to find her, had to reach her before the fire did. Pia's eyes opened, but the dream didn't end. She was moving through the chateau's darkened corridors in her nightgown, bare feet against cold stone, the world hazy and distant like moving through water. She didn't remember getting out of bed. Her hands found a door, night air rushed over her. The terrace, the wide stone balcony with its low wrought-iron railings, 3 stories above the gravel courtyard. She climbed over the railing and stood on the narrow ledge beyond, the drop yawning dark and infinite below her. She took another step toward the edge, hands locked around her waist like steel, wrenching her backward. For one terrifying moment she was falling, wrong direction, back instead of forward, and then she slammed hard against something solid. Heat, muscle, a pulse thundering against her spine. "Pia!" The voice was rough, urgent, vibrating against her back. "Wake up. Now." "Leon." She gasped, eyes snapping open. The terrace, the ledge. Leon's arms wrapped iron-tight around her. "Leon." Her voice came out small, confused. "What? Where am I?" "You were sleepwalking." His grip tightened. "You climbed over the railing. Another second and you would have fallen." The words didn't make sense. Pia blinked, still half lost in the dream. "Fire! Someone was calling me." "I know." Leon shifted his hold, one arm still secure around her waist, while the other came up to turn her in his arms. I've got you. You're safe now." He lifted her against his chest, one arm beneath her knees, the other around her back, cradling her like she weighed nothing. Pia's hands reached instinctively for his shoulders, but she was still half in the dream, still disoriented and shaking, and her arms slid around his neck instead. Leon went completely still. Then he started walking, carrying her back inside. Pia's fingers found the collar of his shirt, seeking anchor, seeking warmth. Her knuckles brushed against something, skin that felt different from the rest, textured and uneven. The scar. She touched it without thinking, still not fully awake, her fingertips tracing the puckered line where it disappeared beneath his collar. Leon's breathing changed, deepened. She felt his awareness of her touch, felt the tension that rippled through his body, but he didn't stop walking, didn't pull her hand away, just kept moving through the darkened corridors with her cradled against him while her fingers explored the damaged skin at his throat, with drowsy, unconscious curiosity. Pia let her head fall against his chest, suddenly exhausted. His scent surrounded her, smoke in old wood and vetiver, dark and masculine, but underneath those notes, something else, his skin, the raw warmth of him. It overwhelmed the other scents in a way that confused her trained nose, in a way that shouldn't happen, and even half asleep she found herself pressing closer, breathing him in like she couldn't get enough. Leon's steps faltered, his pulse hammered beneath her cheek. His arms drew her closer before he seemed to catch himself. When they reached her room, Leon laid her on the bed with a gentleness that contradicted the tension vibrating through him. Pia's eyes were already closing again, exhaustion pulling her back towards sleep. She felt him draw the blankets up over her. Then the mattress dipped slightly as weight settled beside the bed. Through half-closed lids, Pia saw Leon sink into the armchair near her nightstand, his gaze never leaving her face. "Mum," she murmured, as sleep dragged her under. "Mum, where are you?" Leon went rigid. She was already drifting, unaware of how the moonlight painted her skin silver, how her nightgown had slipped off one shoulder, how beautiful and unguarded she looked in sleep. Leon's jaw clenched, his hands fisted against his thighs. If she knew the truth, what connected them, what he'd hidden, what he'd failed to do, she would hate him. So he sat vigil in the darkness, watching her sleep, and kept it buried as long as he could. Pia woke to an empty chair and a folded note on her nightstand. "Business in Marseille, 2 weeks. Continue the work." L. She read it twice, her fingers tracing the sharp slant of his handwriting. No explanation, no apology for leaving while she slept, just orders. The chateau felt different already, too quiet, too still, like a body without breath. The first 3 days, Pia threw herself into the workshop. She catalogued Leon's collection of rare oils, practiced blending variations of the base formula, filled pages of her notebook with combinations that dissolved into nothing without his guidance. The formula needed something she couldn't name. Every attempt felt like grasping at smoke. Helene found her most evenings in the kitchen, picking at dinner she couldn't taste. "He travels often," the housekeeper said gently, refilling Pia's wineglass. "Sourcing materials, meeting suppliers. It's how he built his reputation." Pia nodded. "I'm not waiting for him." Helene's smile was too knowing to argue with. By the second week, she had explored every corner of grass that Jules would drive her to. The Saturday market in the town square, where vendors sold lavender sachets and olive oil in glass bottles, the small cafe where locals gathered for morning coffee and traded gossip in rapid French, she was slowly learning to follow. And Madame Rousseau. The elderly perfumer lived in a cluttered workshop that smelled like her grandmother's garden if her grandmother had spent 60 years extracting scent from flowers. Weathered hands sorted through dried rose petals as she talked about the old ways, before modern distillation, when perfume was patience and prayer. "You work with Léon Martin, yes?" Madame Rousseau asked. "I'm collaborating with him on a project." "Ah." The old woman's eyes sharpened. "Then you are very fortunate. Or very brave." "Léon works alone." Pia's throat tightened. "Not this time." "Then you must be special." Madame Rousseau pressed a small vial of Rose Absolute into her palm, the scent so pure it made Pia's chest ache. A gift for when he returns. The nights were hardest. Pia stood on her balcony watching lavender fields sway under starlight, restless energy building beneath her skin. She thought about the workshop, the formula, the way his hands had felt carrying her through darkened corridors. She missed the electricity, the way her pulse kicked when he entered a room, the dangerous thrill of his attention. The way he made her feel awake. 14 days. She'd survived 14 days without him. On the 15th morning, Pia walked into the workshop and stopped dead. Leon stood at the work table, travel dust on his boots, exhaustion etched around his eyes. But it was what he carried that made her stomach tighten. A wooden crate filled with plants she'd never seen, their leaves silver green and strange. And beneath them, small bottles wrapped in cloth. "You're back," she said. 15 days exactly. His gaze swept over her, cataloguing something she couldn't read. "Did you continue the work?" "Every day." He unwrapped one of the bottles, releasing a scent that hit her like a wave, dark, resinous, almost narcotic. "Oud," he said. "Aged 30 years, from a private collector in Dubai." He set it on the table between them. "I think we're ready now." Ready for what? The way he was looking at her suggested it wasn't just the formula. The next afternoon, Pia had the workshop to herself. Leon had disappeared after lunch, preparing the new materials, Helen said, and the silence felt like permission. She'd been working since dawn, testing the oud he'd brought back, her eyes burning and her mind overfull. She needed to reset. The afternoon light poured through the workshop's glass walls like honey. Pia lay on the wooden work table, her back against the cool surface, arms loose at her sides. The pale yellow linen dress she'd chosen that morning had seemed practical when she put it on. Now it felt like barely anything at all, the fabric thin enough that she could feel the grain of the wood beneath her shoulder blades. The slit fell open across her thigh, and she didn't bother to fix it. She closed her eyes. This was something she'd learned years ago, back in her aunt's tiny apartment in Richmond. How to empty her mind and let scent fill the space instead. Meditation through the nose, the lavender drifting through the open windows, the aged wood of the table, the ghost of 100 essences that had been blended in this room over decades. She breathed in slowly, letting the stillness settle into her bones. She didn't hear Leon enter, but she felt it, the shift in the room's atmosphere, the way the air seemed to thicken and contract. Her eyes stayed closed, her breathing stayed even, but every nerve ending in her body came alive. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, then silence. He was watching her. She could feel his gaze moving over her body like something physical. The exposed column of her throat, the rise and fall of her chest, the bare leg where the dress had fallen open. More footsteps. Closer now. "Don't open your eyes." His voice came from directly beside her, low and rough, and awareness sharpened every sensation. She kept her eyes closed, waited, the soft click of a glass stopper. A scent bloomed in the air, cistus, sharp and honeyed, with aged oud beneath it, the formula they'd been working on. Then his fingers circled her wrist. Cool, precise. He painted the perfume along the inside of her arm in slow strokes from wrist to elbow, the liquid leaving a trail of coolness that her skin immediately began to warm. "Focus on the scent," Leon said. "Nothing else. Let the perfume do its work." His hand moved to her other arm, the same unhurried strokes, wrist to elbow. Pia's lips parted as she tried to steady her breathing. "What do you smell?" "Sisters," she whispered. "Oud. Jasmine sambac. Something green. Clary sage?" "Good." His voice held quiet approval. "And beneath?" She inhaled deeper, searching. There, threaded through everything, a darker note. Warmer. Her chest tightened with something unnamed. His hand left her arm. Then she felt it, his palm settling on her ankle, warm and firm, her breath stuttered. He began to move upward, his touch feather-light, tracing the curve of her calf with agonizing slowness. "Keep focusing," he murmured. "Tell me how the scent changes." But Pia's thoughts were fracturing. His hand had reached her knee, fingers brushing the sensitive hollow behind it, and heat was spreading through her body like wildfire. The perfume on her skin was transforming, the cistus deepening, the oud blooming richer, the jasmine turning heady and thick. His hand slid higher, past her knee, along the inside of her thigh. Pia's back arched involuntarily off the table. "The scent," Leon said, his voice rougher now. "Stay with it." She tried. But his fingers were tracing circles on her inner thigh, maddeningly close to where heat had pooled and gathered, and the perfume was becoming something else entirely. Primal, narcotic, alive. And beneath it all, his scent. She inhaled deeper, trying to read him the way she'd read everyone her entire life. It had always worked. Fear smelled like copper before a storm. She'd learned that young. Lies carried sulfur. Bodies betrayed what mouths denied. 28 years of reading people through their chemistry, through sweat and breath and the oils on skin. But Leon... She caught something. Faint, buried deep beneath the bergamot, beneath the vetiver, beneath the smoke in old wood, beneath everything he wore, like armor. His skin, the raw scent of him. It wasn't guilt, though it lived in the same neighborhood. Not desire, though it made her stomach tighten. Something older, heavier, like smoke that had seeped into wood and never left. And underneath that, a warmth that made something in her chest clench. A scent she'd never encountered on any man. Desire coiled tight in her lower abdomen, spread through her like wine on an empty stomach. Her fingers curled against the wood. This doesn't make sense. She'd read hundreds of people, thousands. Never once had someone's scent made her feel this. His hand stilled on her thigh, fingertips resting against the edge of her underwear. Pia's eyes flew open. Leon was leaning over her, his face inches from hers, those blue-green eyes dark and burning. His chest rose and fell faster than normal. A muscle ticked in his jaw. "The formula," he said quietly, though his voice had gone hoarse. "It responds to arousal. Body temperature rises. Blood chemistry shifts. The perfume becomes... I know what it becomes." Her voice came out breathless, wrecked. "I can smell it." His gaze dropped to her parted lips, stayed there. The seconds stretched like honey. Then Leon pulled back. His hand left her thigh, and the absence was devastating. Restraint sat heavy on his shoulders as he stepped away from the table. "That's enough for today." His voice was controlled again, but she'd heard the crack in it, seen the way his hands weren't quite steady. "You understand the principle now?" Pia sat up, her body still humming, the perfume still clinging to her skin like evidence of what had almost happened. "Yes," she said to his retreating back, "I understand. The principle, the science." The lie. They were both pretending to believe. Pia turned in her bed for the 100th time. The sheets tangled around her legs, silk suddenly too hot against her skin. She pressed her palms against her closed eyelids, but the darkness only sharpened the memory. Leon's hand sliding into her hair, his breath against her neck, the way the perfume had changed when her body responded. She'd skipped dinner. "What did you add to the formula?" The question wouldn't let her rest. Before she could think better of it, she was moving toward the door. Light spilled from beneath Leon's door at the end of the west wing. Pia stopped outside, her hand raised to knock, and heard water running inside. The door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she saw him standing at the bathroom mirror, his back to the door. Steam drifted from the shower as his hands moved to the hem of his black shirt, pulling it over his head in one smooth motion. The burn scar revealed itself inch by inch, beginning at the base of his neck, spreading across his right shoulder in ribbons of silvered tissue, curving down over his collarbone and disappearing beneath the waistband of his trousers. Not smooth, but textured and raised, telling a story written in pain across his skin. Pia froze. Heat bloomed low in her belly before she could stop it. His hands moved to his belt. The metal clinked as he unfastened it. The fabric of his trousers pooled at his feet. He was completely naked. He looked up. His eyes found hers in the mirror's reflection. For 3 heartbeats, neither moved. Then he turned. Leon grabbed a towel from the rack and wrapped it low around his hips as he crossed the bathroom. 3 measured steps to the door, then he pulled it fully open. Pia stumbled back, heat flooding her face as her spine met the corridor wall. He stood in the doorway, steam rising from his skin, the hallway light falling across his scar with nothing to soften it. His expression remained controlled, no smile, no smirk, but his chest rose and fell faster than normal. "Were you watching me? It was an accident." "No." He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough that heat radiated from his bare skin. "There was no accident. You were watching." His free hand caught her wrist, thumb pressing against her pulse. "Racing," he said quietly. "Just like this afternoon." His head dipped toward her neck, not touching, just breathing her in the way he had in the workshop. A sound escaped his throat, low and involuntary, and his fingers tightened around her wrist. "You still smell like the formula." His voice had gone rough, stripped of its usual control. But underneath, something else. His jaw clenched. She watched the muscle tick beneath his skin, watched his Adam's apple move as he swallowed hard. He planted his palm against the wall beside her head, his body angling toward hers, creating a cage of proximity without touching. The scent of soap and clean skin surrounded her. No cologne, nothing artificial, just him. Their faces were inches apart. His mouth hovered over hers, close enough that one small movement would end this. His eyes asked a question, dark, burning. His hand trembled almost imperceptibly against the wall. Pia's gaze dropped to his chest, to the scar, to where his stomach muscles had gone rigid with restraint. Lower, just for a second, to where the towel did nothing to hide what his body couldn't control. Her eyes snapped back to his face. His chest heaved now, control slipping, his other hand lifted, hovering near her jaw, not quite touching, waiting. But her palm pressed against his chest instead, the scar smooth in places, rough in others, his heart slamming against her fingers. She pushed, not hard, just enough. And then she ran. Her footsteps echoed down the corridor as she fled without looking back. Behind her, she heard his fist hit the wall, once, hard, and then silence. Pia pressed her back against her door, chest heaving, her hand still tingling where it had touched his skin. This was wrong. But her body didn't care about wrong. And sooner or later she wouldn't be able to run. Pia woke to sunlight and the crushing memory of last night, her hand against Leon's bare chest, the heat of his skin, the way she'd run. She moved to the window and watched his car disappear down the drive. He was gone. An hour later, Pia found herself in the West Wing. Leon's bedroom door stood open. She hesitated at the doorframe. The room was sparse, a large bed with white linens, dark wood furniture, windows overlooking the fields. Her fingers trailed across the tangled sheets before she could stop herself. Still warm? Or was that her imagination? On the nightstand, a collection of small glass bottles arranged with careful precision. Pia picked up the nearest one and uncorked the delicate stopper. A faint ghost of fragrance drifted out. Jasmine sambac, Madagascar vanilla, iris root from Florence. Strange combination, too unconventional for Grasse tradition, almost defiant. Behind the bottles sat a silver-framed photograph. The woman was beautiful, dark hair, high cheekbones, large eyes that held something melancholic beneath the smile. She wore pearls and an elegant black dress. "Mademoiselle?" Pia spun around. Helene stood in the doorway, her expression soft. She moved into the room and gazed down at the photograph. "Enora," she said quietly. "Leon's mother. She died when he was 10. Cancer." Pia set the bottle down carefully. "It's all right." Helene picked up one of the bottles, cradling it in her weathered hands. "She was a mystery, Enora. Striking, elegant, but always so sad. Perfumes were her only solace. She set it back with quiet reverence. Leon was a sensitive child. When she died, a part of him died with her. He keeps these like talismans. Pia's gaze moved between the photograph and the bottles. She'd seen Leon as intimidating, powerful, untouchable, but this grief preserved in glass was something else entirely. His father, Pia heard herself ask. Where is he? A shadow flickered across Helene's features. Richard Martin lives in New York, with Leon's younger brother, Dominic. She paused. But Leon chose distance from that family. The way she said that family carried weight. Why? Helene's expression went protective. That's not my story to tell. When Leon is ready, he'll explain. She guided Pia toward the door. Come, I'll make you lunch. Pia glanced back at the photograph one last time. His mother's perfumes, his father's distance, a brother she'd never heard of. How many ghosts lived in this chateau, and why did she feel like one of them? 6,000 miles away, dawn had not yet broken over New York. Richard Martin's office occupied the entire 48th floor of a midtown tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. The walls displayed stolen artifacts, paintings, sculptures, antiquities worth fortunes, acquired through channels that kept no records. Richard Martin sat behind a desk carved from a single piece of ebony, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his tailored suit sharp enough to draw blood. At 68, he looked like what he was, a man who'd built an empire on things that shouldn't be bought or sold. The door opened. Dominic Martin entered, 36, and built like someone who settled problems with his hands. He crossed to the desk without being invited to sit. Father? His voice carried a faint accent Richard had lost decades ago. Payments made. The shipments from Egypt and Turkey cleared customs this morning. Richard's fingers steepled beneath his chin. Good. Dominic's jaw tightened, that tell he'd never learned to hide. And Father, I found the girl. The words hung in the air. Richard's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe. Or vindication. Where? The chateau in Grasse. She's with Leon now. A slow smile spread across Richard's face, cold and calculating. So my eldest got to her first. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. I knew Leon couldn't stay away from her. 20 years running. But he can't run from this girl. Dominic's hand moved to his waist, unconscious habit. What's the play? Watch from a distance. Richard's voice carried absolute authority. When the time's right, we move. No need to rush this. Dominic pulled the gun from his belt and set it on the desk with a heavy thud, then shrugged out of his jacket, his shirt stretched across shoulders built for violence. She doesn't know who he is yet. Richard's smile widened. If she did, she wouldn't be there. He rose from his chair and moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a kingdom he owned. And in many ways, he did. Leon thinks he can protect her, Richard said quietly, more to himself than to Dominic. He thinks distance and time changed anything. But blood calls to blood, son. Dominic said nothing, just watched his father's reflection in the glass. He turned back to his son. Watch. Wait. Report. Nothing else. Dominic nodded once, picked up his gun, and left without another word. Richard returned to his desk, pulled open a drawer, and removed a photograph, yellowed with age, the edges soft from handling. A young woman with dark hair and frightened eyes stared back at him. I couldn't keep you, he murmured to the image, but I'll keep her. He slid the photograph back into the drawer and closed it with quiet finality. Pia found Leon in the kitchen just after sunset, sleeves rolled to his elbows, stirring a pot on the old stone stove. She stopped in the doorway. Her eyes kept drifting to his forearms, the way muscles shifted under skin as he lifted a wooden spoon, and she had to look away before he caught her staring. He was pouring red wine into the pot when she cleared her throat. What are you cooking? Leon glanced over his shoulder. A flicker passed through his eyes. Daube Provençale, beef braised in wine. It takes hours. She moved closer. I could make dessert. He turned fully, one eyebrow raised. Can you? She nodded toward the bowl of lemons on the counter. Tart. He smiled, something genuine reaching his eyes. Come here. Pia crossed to the marble counter and gathered butter and flour, her hands working the dough while Leon moved beside her. The silence felt different than in the workshop. Easier, almost comfortable. You've been avoiding me, he said quietly. Pia's fingers stilled. Funny, I was about to say the same about you. Leon set down his knife and turned to face her. He reached out slowly, his thumb brushing flour from her cheek, lingering a moment too long. Pia's lips parted. Tomorrow morning, he said, his voice rough. We're flying to Istanbul. The words cut through the fog. Istanbul? Why? A contact there has rare botanicals I need. He stepped back. And you've been working hard. The trip might do you good. That evening they sat across from each other, candlelight catching in deep red wine. This perfume, Pia said carefully. It must mean something to you. Beyond money. You're already wealthy. Is it fame you want? The corner of his mouth lifted. Fame is the last thing I want. I value my privacy too much. Then why do they call you the ghost collector? His expression shuttered. Scent has been my obsession since childhood. It has to do with my mother. Pia leaned forward. What are you chasing? Is this perfume supposed to fix pain? Or when you ease someone else's suffering, you'll finally stop feeling guilty about whatever you can't change? Leon's eyes went cold. His jaw tightened as he stood abruptly. Leon, I'm sorry. Pia caught his shoulder. I didn't mean to. He turned so fast she didn't have time to step back. Then his hands were in her hair and his mouth was on hers. The kiss was hard and hungry, his grip tightening as he backed her against the table. His tongue swept into her mouth. Wine and want and weakness flooded Pia's limbs. She grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer, her body melting into his. His hand slid down her spine, pulling her flush against him, and she felt exactly what this was doing to him. A moan caught in her throat, and he swallowed the sound, kissing her deeper. Then he pulled away, breathing hard. I need... His voice was wrecked. He moved back, fists clenched. I need to be alone. He was already moving toward the stairs. At the landing, he stopped. Be ready at 6. We have a plane to catch. Then he was gone. Pia stood there, lips swollen, body humming. She touched her mouth with shaking fingers. Tomorrow, Istanbul. She didn't know which terrified her more, the city or the man taking her there. The private car wound through streets Pia had only seen in photographs. Istanbul unfolded before her, the Bosphorus glittering in morning light, waterfront mansions lining the shore with dark wooden facades. Mosques rose against the sky, their minarets sharp. The air smelled of spices and salt water, exhaust and something sweetly floral. Pia pressed closer to the window. First time? Leon asked. She couldn't look away from the minarets piercing the sky, the ferries cutting across the water. Yes, it's beautiful. The car slowed, then stopped. Leon stepped out and offered his hand. From here, we walk. They moved through Sultanahmet, past Byzantine columns and Ottoman fountains. The streets grew narrower, the crowds thicker. Leon's hand found hers. Stay close. His fingers laced through hers, warm and firm. Pia's breath caught. She told herself it was the heat. The Grand Bazaar swallowed them, vaulted ceilings, endless corridors, shops spilling silks and gold. The air was thick with voices bargaining, the scent of leather and coffee and something resinous. Leon pulled her closer as the crowd pressed in. They turned down a quieter corridor. The shops here sold different things, bottles of amber liquid, dried herbs, small vials of oil. Leon stopped before a narrow door. He knocked twice. A young man opened it, gestured them inside. The shop sold spices, sacks of red powder and golden seeds, glass jars filled with bark, but the man led them past the display, through a curtain. The room beyond was modern, clean lines, sleek desk, soft lighting. and behind that desk sat a woman who made Pia's stomach tighten. Dark hair fell past her shoulders, wide brown eyes. Her dress had a neckline that dipped low, black fabric against olive skin, stiletto heels, red lips curving into a smile. "Leon," she rose, her voice warm with familiarity. "Welcome back." Esma crossed the room and kissed Leon's cheek, lingering a beat too long, her fingers trailing down his chest before pulling away. She murmured something in Turkish, low and intimate. Pia's nails dug into her palms. Esma's gaze slid to Pia, assessing. "I see you brought a friend this time. How lovely." "Pia." Leon placed a hand on the small of her back. "My business partner." The warmth did not reach Esma's eyes. She gestured to the leather chairs across from her desk. "Please, sit. Turkish coffee?" "I have always enjoyed your coffee," Leon said, guiding Pia into one of the chairs before settling beside her. Esma's expression turned knowing as she moved toward the coffee setup. "Among other things." The words landed like a slap. Pia's stomach dropped. Esma prepared the coffee with fluid confidence, her movements unhurried. The way she glanced at Leon, proprietary, familiar, made something sharp twist in Pia's chest. She set the small cups before them, then returned to her seat. "So, your black amber resin." A glance at Pia. "And your new partner. I was expecting you alone." Leon's tone stayed even. "Plans changed." Esma held his gaze for a moment, then wrote a number on a slip of paper and slid it across the desk. "The price reflects the quality." Leon's jaw tightened as he read it. "This is higher than we discussed." "Market fluctuates." Esma leaned back in her chair. "I can also offer pure saffron threads." The door opened behind them. A man stepped through, broad-shouldered, maybe 40, dark hair graying at the temples. His eyes locked onto Leon, and his entire body went rigid. "Esma," his voice cut through the room, "we need to talk." Esma's posture stiffened. "Keenan, I am with clients." Her brother ignored her, his gaze fixed on Leon. "I can see that." He stepped closer, hands curling into fists at his sides. "You are Martin, Dominic Martin's brother. I know what your family does." Pia looked at Leon. His face gave nothing away. "I don't work with the family anymore," Leon said quietly. Keenan's lip curled. "Once a Martin, always a Martin." He turned to his sister. "Whatever you're selling him, refuse it." "Keenan, please." "No." His hand moved to his waist. A gun handle glinted beneath his jacket. "Get out. Take your business somewhere else." Leon rose slowly. Pia followed, her pulse hammering. He placed an envelope on the desk, his voice steady. "For the resin and the saffron. Delivered to the Four Seasons by tonight." He took Pia's hand. "We're leaving." Keenan blocked the path, not moving. "If you hurt her, I have no interest in hurting anyone." Leon's voice went colder than Pia had ever heard. "Least of all your sister." He guided Pia past Keenan, through the shop, back into the bazaar. 20 paces away, Pia pulled her hand free and stopped. "Leon," she faced him. "What did he mean? Dominic Martin? Your family?" His expression was unreadable, but a muscle ticked in his jaw. "Not here." "Then where?" He exhaled slowly, glancing at the crowds pressing around them. "Tonight. I'll tell you tonight." He offered his hand again. After a heartbeat, Pia took it. But as they walked through the crowded bazaar, one question drowned out the rest. Was she safe with Leon Martin, or in danger because of him? The hotel was a restored Ottoman palace on the edge of the Bosphorus, its white stone facade gleaming in the afternoon light, wrought iron balconies tracing elegant curves above the water. Pia stood on hers, breathing in salt air and diesel smoke, and something floral that she couldn't quite name. Jasmine, perhaps, or orange blossom drifting up from some hidden garden below. This city had its own scent. Ancient and modern, sacred and profane, all tangled together. But her mind kept circling back. Martin. Dominic Martin's brother. Helene had said Leon's family was in New York. She had not mentioned that they were dangerous, that men reached for guns at the sound of their name. And Esma, her red lips curving into that knowing smile, her fingers trailing down Leon's chest like she had every right to touch him. Among other things. The words echoed, sharp and unwelcome. How many women had Leon taken to private events? How many had he undressed afterward? A knock pulled her from her thoughts. She stepped back into the room. Leon stood in the doorway, his shoulder against the frame. His eyes swept the room, then settled on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Tonight we're attending a private event," he said. "Traditional dress required." Pia's eyebrows rose. "Then I should go shopping." "I've arranged it." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Ottoman night celebration. The outfit will arrive soon." She blinked, caught off guard. "How do you know my size?" Leon's gaze traveled down her body, slow, deliberate, then back up to her face. Pia felt the heat climb her neck, spread across her cheeks. "In the kitchen," he said quietly. "When I kissed you, my hands were on your waist. I noticed." A pause. "I'm good at reading details. Perfume, women's bodies." His voice dropped. "Especially yours." Pia's breath stuttered. "That's—" She swallowed. "Presumptuous." His smile warmed, just slightly. "I'll pick you up in 2 hours. Rest." He left before she could respond. 30 minutes later, a young woman handed her a box wrapped in cream silk, tied with a gold ribbon. Pia untied it with fingers that trembled slightly, lifted the lid, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. Crimson fabric spilled out like liquid fire, embroidered with delicate gold thread that caught the afternoon light. A cropped top that would bare her stomach entirely, the neckline cut low enough to show the curve of her breasts. The skirt sat low on the hips, sheer panels at the sides revealing glimpses of leg with every movement. She held it up against her body. "I'm supposed to wear this?" This was nothing like the modest linen dresses she wore in Grasse, nothing like the invisible clothes she had hidden behind in New York. She hung it on the door and moved to the marble tub near the window, turning the brass taps until steam rose in thick clouds. The Bosphorus stretched silver and endless beyond the glass, ferries cutting white lines across the dark water. The heat was almost too much as she sank into it, but she welcomed the burn, let it ease the tension coiled in her shoulders and spine. She should have been thinking about Martin family secrets, about Keenan's gun glinting beneath his jacket, about what tonight might reveal. Instead, her thoughts drifted to Esma, the way she had murmured something in Turkish, low and intimate, the way Leon had not pulled away from her touch. Had they been lovers? Were they still? Does it matter? She sank deeper until the water reached her chin. It shouldn't matter. This was a business arrangement. 6 months, a perfume, nothing more. But when she finally stepped out of the bath and slipped into the crimson silk, when she stood before the mirror and saw the woman staring back, she barely recognized herself. The fabric clung to curves she usually hid, exposed skin she usually covered. Her wet hair fell in dark waves past her shoulders. Her eyes looked larger, darker, almost wild. This was someone bolder, more dangerous. Is this who he sees when he looks at me? A knock at the door. "Pia," Leon's voice low through the wood. "Are you ready?" She took one last look at the stranger in the mirror. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready. Ready for the party. Ready for the truth." She just wasn't sure she was ready for both. When Pia opened the door, Leon went still. His gaze swept over her, the crimson silk clinging to her curves, the bare stomach, the low neckline, and for one unguarded moment she saw it, raw hunger. Then his expression smoothed into something controlled. "You've been hiding," he said quietly. "Time to let the goddess out." Heat climbed her neck. She looked at him, loose linen pants, an ethnic shirt that left most of his chest bare, the scar tissue climbing from collarbone to shoulder, bronze skin against white fabric. "Men don't have as many options," he said, a hint of amusement crossing his face. The car wound along the Bosphorus, windows open to the September breeze. Leon watched her from the corner of his eye. Interesting, he said. Pia glanced at him. What? You create perfumes, but you wear almost nothing, just white musk, very faint. She smiled. My mother's formula. I turned it into a cream, neutral. It doesn't interfere when I'm working. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then lifted. It suits you. The breeze shifted, carrying his scent. Smoke and woods and vetiver, dark and masculine. Something that settled deep in her chest and made her want to lean closer. Chiran Palace stretched beneath the Bosphorus Bridge, vast gardens leading into ornate halls. Everyone wore traditional dress, low tables, silk cushions, candlelight flickering. On raised platforms, dancers swayed to drums and ode, their movements hypnotic. Pia felt like she'd stepped into another century. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tiny vial, placed one drop on her fingertip, touched it to her neck, then leaned toward Leon and brushed it against his throat. Leon stilled, his jaw tightening. What are you doing? A small test. She met his gaze. Don't you want to see the effect? His eyes darkened. Let's find out. They ate lamb cooked over open flames, drank rake that burned sweet. Leon spoke with the man beside him in rapid Turkish, his voice rougher in that language, his hands gesturing in ways she'd never seen. French, English, now Turkish. How many versions of this man existed? She watched his mouth form unfamiliar words, watched the way his throat moved when he laughed at something the man said. Her fingers tightened around her glass. Stop staring. She excused herself and stepped onto the terrace, because if she stayed, she would touch him. Her hand on his thigh, her fingers tracing his jaw. She needed air, needed distance from the heat building between them. Her pulse was racing, skin too warm. Is it the perfume? Is it working? Or did she simply want him? Had wanted him since the first night in Grasse, when he'd carried her from the balcony and she'd felt safe in a stranger's arms. The Bosphorus stretched dark below, lights from passing boats reflecting on the water. Footsteps approached. Pia! She turned. A man stood behind her, tall, dirty blonde beard, hazel eyes that held hers too long, mid-30s, dressed in black. Her eyes narrowed. He knew her name. Do I know you? No. His smile didn't reach his eyes. But I know you. You're with Leon. Unease prickled along her spine. And you are? Dominic. He stepped closer, head tilting as if catching a scent. That fragrance. Is it you? Before she could move, he leaned in, breath warm against her neck. Pia jerked back. Impressive, he murmured. A hand settled on her waist, smoke and vetiver reaching her before she turned. Leon. Dominic. His voice was flat. What are you doing here? Business trip. Dominic shrugged, but his smile said otherwise. He'd known exactly where to find them. It's been 2 years, brother. You don't need to see me. Leon's voice went cold. Dominic's smile widened, sharp and knowing. And yet here we are. Leon's fingers tightened on Pia's waist. He pulled her away without another word. They moved through the crowd. A woman in gold silk stepped into their path, placing her hand on Leon's arm, murmuring something in Turkish with a slow smile. Pia's nails dug into her palm. Leon glanced at Pia. Then he took the woman's hand off his arm. No, he said. He guided Pia toward the exit. Outside, the night air was cool. They stood at the curb waiting for the car. A man stumbled toward them, drunk, eyes glazed but suddenly sharp when they landed on Pia. He reached out, fingers brushing her bare arm. Who are you? He slurred, his gaze traveling down her body, hungry. Leon moved. One step, and he was between them, his hand catching the man's wrist. Don't touch her. His voice was low, dangerous. The man's face went pale. He stumbled back, disappeared into the crowd. Leon turned to her, his expression still hard. Are you all right? Pia nodded, but her heart was pounding, not from fear, from the way he'd moved, the way he'd looked, the possessiveness in his voice. The car arrived. Leon opened the door for her, his hand brushing the small of her back as she climbed in. Their eyes met and held, neither looking away, as he slid in beside her. Silence filled the space between them as the car wound through the city. "Who was that?" Pia finally asked. Leon stared out the window, his expression hardening. "My brother, Dominic. He works with my father in New York. Family business." Her stomach tightened. What kind of business? He turned, a dark smile touching his lips. "The kind you don't ask about." He held her gaze. "Some of it's illegal." She searched his face, looking for something, reassurance maybe. "But you're not part of it." "No." His voice was quiet, final. "I've been gone for 20 years. Pia's hands twisted in her lap. "Should I be worried?" His gaze softened, just barely. "Not about me." It wasn't a denial, just a careful boundary drawn in the sand. Something was different now. The air felt heavier. Every breath seemed to carry his scent, deeper now, warmer. Every accidental touch of their knees sent heat racing up her thigh. Pia's gaze kept drifting to his chest, the open collar, the veins tracing down his forearms where his sleeves were rolled. Leon's voice broke the silence. "The perfume." He turned to her, eyes dark. "It's working." Pia swallowed. "You feel it too? Since we left the palace?" His jaw tightened. "I can't stop thinking about—" He stopped himself. Their eyes met, and in that look, everything was said. They both knew. They both wanted. They stood outside her door. Pia's key trembled in her hand. She turned to face him, pulse racing beneath her skin. Leon's finger traced the line of her jaw, feather light, reverent. His thumb brushed across her lower lip. "I should walk away," he said quietly. "I should let you sleep." Her breath caught. "But—" His eyes burned into hers. "I can't resist you anymore." He kissed her. Soft at first. His mouth moved over hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Then his hand slid to the small of her bare back, fingers splaying against skin, and hunger replaced gentleness. Leon broke the kiss just long enough to breathe against her lips. "Pia," he murmured, voice wrecked in a way she hadn't heard from him before. "You did this on purpose." Pia's lashes fluttered. "Did what?" "The perfume." His mouth skimmed her jaw, then her throat, then lower, every kiss slower than the last, like torture disguised as devotion. "You didn't want a test." Pia's head tipped back without permission, her pulse racing beneath his mouth, and she forced herself to whisper, "Maybe I wanted to see if you could lose control." Leon's breath stalled. Then he lifted his head, and the look he gave her made something hot snap inside her. "If I lose control," he said softly, "you'll feel it." The words sent fire licking through her veins, instant and sharp. She didn't even get the chance to respond because Leon's hands were already moving, one to her back, one to the thin straps of her top, sliding them down her shoulders with slow inevitability. The crimson silk loosened, bared more skin. Leon's gaze followed it. Pia felt the air hit her like a shiver. She saw the moment it changed him. His eyes darkened further, his nostrils flared, and for a second it looked like he was holding himself still by sheer willpower, like a man standing on the edge of something and trying not to fall. He pushed the door open, lifted her, carried her inside. The door slammed shut. Leon set her down beside the bed. His hands moved to the ties of her top, working them loose. The rest of the crimson silk fell away. His gaze traveled over her, dark, hungry, and Pia's skin felt too tight, too sensitive under the weight of his attention. She reached for his shirt, tugging the linen over his head. Her hands slid down his chest, fingers tracing the scar, then lower. When her fingertips grazed the waistband of his pants, she felt him tense beneath her touch. A low groan escaped him, his hand tangled in her hair. The sheets were cool at first, shocking against her heated skin, and Pia's breath hitched as Leon hovered above her, his eyes traveling over her body with something almost reverent. For a moment, he didn't touch her. He just looked, as if he was trying to convince himself this was real. Then his hand slid up her thigh, slow, patient, deliberate. and Pia felt her body tense, then soften, then melt into the sensation like she'd been waiting for that exact touch all her life. Leon's mouth followed his hand, kissing a line along her skin that made desire coil tight in her lower abdomen with every press of his lips. Pia's fingers tangled in his hair. His weight settled over her. His mouth found hers, deep and claiming. His hands moved over her body, ribs, waist, hips, stripping away the rest. When his skin pressed against hers, awareness sharpened every sensation to almost pain. She tasted salt on his skin, felt the fever of his body against hers. "Leon." His name broke on her lips. His mouth moved to her throat, her collarbone. His hand slid between her thighs, and pleasure sparked through her, sharp and electric. Her hips lifted. A sound escaped her, half gasp, half surrender. They came together in a rush of heat and breathless need. The fullness, the friction, overwhelming. Her legs wrapped around him, pulling him deeper. Leon's forehead touched hers. A muscle jumped in his cheek, restraint cracking. "Look at me," he murmured. "I want to see your eyes when you fall apart." Pia's gaze locked with his. "Pia," he groaned, "I need you." The words cut through the haze, raw and broken. Her body clenched around him. The pressure climbed, unbearable, and then pleasure crashed through her in waves. She gasped his name, trembling, nails raking down his back, eyes still locked with his, watching him watch her shatter. Leon shuddered, burying himself deep. His rhythm broke. He came with a groan, body going tense before collapsing against her. For a long moment, neither moved, just breathing, hearts pounding against each other. Then Leon shifted, rolling onto his side, pulling her against him. His arm settled across her waist. His lips pressed to her hair. "Stay," he murmured. "Don't leave." Pia lay there, body still humming, mind slowly returning. "I need you." She was falling for him, hard and fast and terrifying, and lying in his arms, she didn't want to stop. Pia woke to sunlight and the distant hum of a city coming alive. Her body ached, a sweet, unfamiliar soreness that bloomed between her thighs and radiated through her limbs. She stretched beneath the tangled sheets, feeling the echo of last night in every muscle. His scent clung to her skin, smoke and vetiver, and something darker now, something that was just him. The bed beside her was empty. She sat up slowly, the sheet pooling at her waist. Through the open doors of the terrace she saw him. Leon, shoulders bare, sitting in the jacuzzi with the Bosphorus stretching silver and blue behind him. Steam rose from the water, curling into the morning air. Pia wrapped the sheet around herself and walked out. "Good morning." Leon turned. His gaze swept over her, the tangled hair, the flushed cheeks, the white cotton clutched to her chest. And something shifted in his expression, softer, hungrier. "Come here." His voice was quiet, commanding. "To me." She crossed the terrace, her bare feet warm against the stone. When she reached the edge of the jacuzzi, she sat down, legs dangling in the hot water. Leon's hand closed around her wrist. One pull, swift, effortless, and she was in the water, gasping as warmth engulfed her. The sheet billowed around her, heavy and useless, and Leon peeled it away, tossing the soaked fabric over the edge. Then he pulled her onto his lap. His hands settled on her hips, holding her there, her thighs bracketing his. Water lapped between them. His chest was warm and solid beneath her palms, the scar tissue rough under her fingertips. He kissed her, deep and claiming, the way he'd kissed her last night, like he couldn't get enough, like he'd been starving for years, and she was the first meal. Pia pulled back just enough to breathe. "Is it the perfume?" she whispered. "Still working?" A slow smile curved his lips. "Not right now." His mouth dropped to her throat, trailing heat down the column of her neck, and a moan escaped her before she could stop it. Her fingers found his jaw, traced the scar climbing from his collarbone. She'd never seen a mark make someone more beautiful, more dangerous, more devastatingly him. Leon lifted her chin, forcing her gaze to his. Those blue-green eyes burned into hers as he shifted beneath her, and then he was inside her, slow, deliberate, filling her completely, Her breath shattered. They held there, suspended in heat and want, watching each other. The desire in his eyes mirrored her own, and something about that, seeing herself reflected in him, made her pulse race faster. "Tell me you're mine," he said, voice rough. Her hips rolled against him, drawing a groan from his throat. "I'm yours, Leon." They moved together, a rhythm that built slow and urgent, water sloshing against the edges of the jacuzzi. Her moans filled the morning air. His hands gripped her waist, guiding her, and she buried her face in his neck, breathing him in. And then she realized what she was smelling. Not just his skin, not just the steam and the salt and the heat. For the first time since they'd met, she could read him. From the beginning, Leon had been a closed book, his scent guarded, unreadable, unlike anyone she'd ever encountered. But now, with his body moving inside hers, his walls had finally crumbled, and what she smelled beneath them took her breath away. He belongs to me, not possession, not obsession, something deeper. She could smell the truth of his feelings, raw and undeniable. This wasn't the perfume. This wasn't lust. Leon wanted her with something that went beyond desire, something that felt like fate. His feelings were real. He was hers. The certainty of it pushed her over the edge. She came with his name on her lips, trembling, and felt him follow moments later, his body going taut beneath her. Pia dressed slowly, her body still humming from the morning. She chose a simple white sundress, let her hair fall loose around her shoulders. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself, flushed cheeks, swollen lips, a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. Downstairs, she ate breakfast on the terrace overlooking the Bosphorus. Fresh figs, honey, strong Turkish coffee. The September sun warmed her skin. She kept glancing at the lobby entrance, waiting for Leon to return. "Half an hour," he'd said. She checked her phone. 45 minutes now. Restless, she left the hotel and walked along the waterfront. Fishing boats bobbed in the harbour. Seagulls cried overhead. The air smelled of salt and diesel and something faintly floral, jasmine maybe, from the gardens nearby. She didn't hear the car until it was too late. A black Mercedes pulled up beside her, sleek and silent. 2 men in dark suits stepped out before she could react. One grabbed her arm, the other blocked her path. Pia opened her mouth to scream. A hand clamped over it. They shoved her into the back seat, and the door slammed shut behind her. The locks clicked. The car pulled away from the curb. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she scrambled upright and found herself staring at a familiar face. Dominic sat across from her, one ankle crossed over his knee, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Hello again, Pia." Ice flooded her veins. "I had to protect you. From my family." Leon's words echoed in her skull, taking on new meaning. She pressed herself against the door, her voice steadier than she felt. "What do you want from me?" "Just a conversation." Dominic's tone was casual, almost friendly. "Nothing more. I have nothing to say to you." She tried the door handle. Locked. Dominic watched her with mild amusement. "I'm a reasonable man, Pia. I have no intention of hurting you." He tilted his head, studying her. "I just want to know, how well do you actually know my brother?" Her jaw tightened. "Well enough. Have you ever asked him about his scar?" Dominic's smile widened. "About how he got it?" "It was a fire." Her voice came out clipped. "An accident." "Which fire?" Dominic leaned forward, and something cruel flickered in his hazel eyes. "Did he tell you it was the same fire that killed your mother?" The words landed like a blow to the chest. Pia's breath caught. The leather seat seemed to tilt beneath her. "You're lying." "Am I?" Dominic's expression didn't change. "Do you know who owned the laboratory where Claire Chamberlain died? Do you know that fire wasn't an accident?" Nausea coiled in her stomach. Her hands had gone cold, trembling in her lap. "Even if I believed you, which I don't, why tell me this? He's your brother." Dominic's shoulder lifted in an elegant shrug. "Let's just say it bothers me. Watching him live his happy little life in France while the rest of us deal with the family business." His smile turned sharp. But you don't have to take my word for it. Do your own research. Pia's vision blurred. Tears burned at the backs of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. My mother died in a lab explosion, she said, her voice cracking despite herself. An accident. That's what the report said. Yes. Dominic's smile was almost gentle now, which made it worse. At Martin Industries. Your mother worked for our father, Pia. And now you're sleeping with his son. He paused, letting the words sink in. How does that feel? She couldn't breathe. Her chest had gone tight, lungs refusing to expand. Dominic leaned closer and she caught his scent, cologne and something sour beneath it, something that smelled like satisfaction. It was lovely seeing you again. His voice dropped, intimate and unsettling. He tilted his head toward her neck, inhaling slowly. That perfume you wore last night, it makes a man think thoughts he shouldn't. Revulsion crawled up her spine. He signaled to the driver. The locks clicked open. You can go. Pia fumbled for the handle, nearly falling onto the sidewalk in her rush to escape. The door slammed behind her, and the Mercedes pulled away, disappearing into traffic. She stood there, shaking. Leon Martin, Martin Industries. The name echoed in her skull over and over until it didn't sound like a name anymore, just a verdict. Her stomach heaved. She pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting the urge to be sick right there on the street. Was Dominic telling the truth? Was Leon connected to her mother's death? Had he known this whole time, known who she was, known what happened, and said nothing? I had to protect you. From my family. From myself. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, streaming down her cheeks as she half walked, half ran back toward the hotel. She didn't know what she'd say when she saw him. She didn't know if she could look at him at all. Leon burst through the hotel room door, heart pounding. Pia? Silence answered him. He crossed to her room in 3 strides and stopped dead in the doorway. The closet stood open, empty hangers swaying. Her suitcase was gone. The bathroom counter, bare. No toiletries, no makeup, nothing. She'd left. His phone was in his hand before he'd finished the thought, fingers dialing with practice speed. Jules, check the airports. Find out if Pia booked a flight. His voice came out flat, controlled. The voice he used when everything inside him was screaming. And locate Dominic's private jet. Now. He didn't wait for confirmation. He was already moving, taking the stairs 2 at a time, shoving through the lobby doors and into the first taxi he saw. Airport, he said. Fast. Across the city, Pia stood in line at passport control, her hands trembling around her boarding pass. Boston. The first flight she could find, heading back to the States. It didn't matter where. She just needed to be far from here. Far from him. Her phone sat heavy in her pocket, powered off. She couldn't bear to see his name on the screen. Couldn't bear to hear his voice, knowing what she knew now. Martin Industries. Your mother worked for our father. The line shuffled forward. She clutched her passport tighter. Everything she'd left behind played through her mind like a fever dream. Grasse, the lavender fields, the atelier filled with thousands of essences, the perfume they'd been building together, the one that was supposed to change everything. Her stomach lurched. She'd trusted him, opened herself to him in ways she'd never done with anyone, and all along he'd known, he must have known. I had to protect you, from my family, from myself. Now those words sounded less like devotion and more like confession. The agent stamped her passport. She walked through the gate on numb legs. She couldn't go back to her apartment in New York. Leon would find her there. There was only one place left. The only person who'd never lied to her. Richmond. Aunt Margaret. As the plane lifted off the runway, Pia pressed her forehead to the cold window. Tears slid down her cheeks, silent and unstoppable. She was in love with him, that was the worst part, and now that love felt like poison in her veins. 16 hours later, the porch light flickered on before Pia even reached the steps. The door swung open, and Margaret stood there in her bathrobe, silver hair loose around her shoulders, eyes wide with shock. Pia! Her aunt's voice cracked. Sweetheart, I've been trying to reach you for days. Pia fell into her arms. She didn't cry. She was too exhausted for tears. She just held on, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender soap and old books, the smell of the only home she'd ever really known. An hour later, they sat in the kitchen. Steam rose from 2 untouched cups of coffee. The old clock on the wall ticked too loud in the silence. Pia set down her cup, her hands still unsteady. "How did my mother really die?" Margaret's face went pale. "I need the truth." Pia's voice hardened. "Who did she work for? Who was my father? Why has the past always been such a mystery?" Her throat tightened. "Every time I asked, you gave me half answers, fragments. I need to know everything, now." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table, gripping Pia's hand. "The fire report was altered," she said quietly. "I suspected from the beginning. But the people Claire worked for, they were powerful, Pia. Dangerous." She drew a shaky breath. "The official story said the explosion happened in the laboratory. But witnesses, the ones who weren't paid off, said it started at the building's entrance, not inside. Someone set that fire deliberately." The kitchen seemed to tilt. Pia gripped the edge of the table. "Why would the Martins destroy their own lab?" Margaret wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "Because Claire found out what they were really doing. It wasn't just perfume research. The Martins were smugglers, art, rare plants, illegal botanicals. When the FBI reached out to Claire, she didn't want to get involved at first. But then—" Margaret's voice broke. "She decided she had to do the right thing." Pia leaned forward, her pulse roaring in her ears. What was the problem? Why didn't she just cooperate? Margaret looked at her with something like grief. "The problem," she whispered, "was that she'd fallen in love with Richard Martin." 3,000 miles away, the door to Richard Martin's office slammed open hard enough to crack against the wall. Richard looked up from his desk and a slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Leon." He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. "What brings you all the way here?" Leon crossed the room in 4 strides, stopping just short of the massive mahogany desk. His chest heaved, his hands shook with barely contained rage. "Why can't you leave me alone?" The words came out low, dangerous. "Where's Dominic? What did he do to Pia?" Richard's smile didn't waver. "You've been obsessed with that girl for 20 years, son. Following her, paying for her education, watching from the shadows." He tilted his head, eyes gleaming with something like amusement. "And now you've finally made her your lover. How touching." Leon's fist slammed into the desk. The impact rattled a crystal decanter, sent papers scattering. "Keep her out of this. Whatever's between us, it stays between us. Where is she?" Richard spread his hands, the picture of innocence. "I have no idea." Leon's voice dropped, raw with decades of buried pain. "Don't you ever feel guilty? About any of it?" His hands clenched at his sides. "I've carried this guilt for 20 years. Every single day." Richard rose slowly, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. "That's your weakness." He circled the desk, stopping an arm's length away. "Guilt is a luxury men like us can't afford. If I felt remorse for everything I've done, I could never have built this empire." His eyes hardened. "Power demands sacrifice, Leon. Are you really this weak? Is this how I raised you?" He shook his head slowly. "I had such hopes for you. More faith in you than I ever had in Dominic. You murdered an innocent woman. I protected this empire." Richard's eyes hardened. "Power demands sacrifice. I thought I raised you to understand that." Leon stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse jumping in his father's throat. "I never wanted your empire. I never wanted any of it. And the things you forced me to do—" His voice cracked. "I've spent 20 years trying to wash that blood off my hands." Richard smiled, thin, patronizing. "And yet you kept watching the girl, kept protecting her from afar. Why do you think that is?" "Because someone had to. Because you couldn't let go." Richard reached out, straightening Leon's collar with a father's casual intimacy. I could have stopped you, you know, could have kept you away from Pia entirely, but I didn't. His smile sharpened. I let you get close. I wanted to see what would happen. Leon's blood ran cold. What did you say? Richard's eyes glittered. You heard me. In Richmond, Pia felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. My mother and Richard Martin. She could barely form the words. They were together? Margaret nodded slowly, her eyes red-rimmed. For almost 10 years. It was passionate, volatile. Richard was never fully faithful to her, but I know there were times he genuinely cared. She pressed a tissue to her cheek. Claire tried to end it so many times. She'd walk away, swear she was done, but somehow they always found their way back to each other. A bitter smile crossed her lips. Richard was magnetic, powerful. He knew exactly how to make a woman feel like the center of the universe. Tears streamed down Pia's face, hot and unstoppable. Her chest felt like it was caving in. Then he could have... Her voice cracked. He could have killed her, the woman he supposedly cared about. The words tasted like acid. Did he find out she was talking to the FBI? Margaret shook her head, grief etched into every line of her face. I don't know, sweetheart, I have no proof, but the suspicion has eaten at me for 20 years. Pia drew a shaky breath. There was one more question, the one she'd been circling around, the one she dreaded more than anything. Aunt Margaret, her voice came out strangled. Who was my father? 300 miles north, the top floor of Martin Industries had gone deathly silent. Leon took a step toward Richard, his eyes blazing. What did you mean by that? I know you've been having me followed. Were you tracking Pia too? Richard's smile shifted into something almost sorrowful. Of course I was, Leon. Of course I was tracking her. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. She's Claire's daughter. Our daughter. The blow landed like a fist to the gut. Leon's ears rang. His lungs seized. For a moment, the room tilted sideways, and he couldn't remember how to breathe. You're lying. The words scraped out of his throat. Tell me that's not true. Pia can't be your daughter. She is. Richard's voice was calm, almost gentle. My daughter. Dominic's sister. He walked slowly toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. No one knew except Claire and me. I wasn't about to let her out of my sight. Leon collapsed into the nearest chair, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. His chest heaved, his hands shook against his thighs, then his eyes narrowed, cutting through the shock. What did you say? Dominic's sister? Richard stood at the window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. Yes, Dominic's sister, Leon, not yours. The words didn't make sense. Leon's mind struggled to process them, turning them over like foreign objects. Your mother, Inora. Richard's voice softened, taking on a distant quality. She was already pregnant when I fell in love with her. I adored that woman. I never asked who the baby's father was. Never brought it up, not once. I raised you as my own son, loved you as my own. He turned, and something almost like affection flickered across his weathered face. In fact, I loved you more than Dominic. You never cried when you fell down, never asked for help, even as a child. You handled everything yourself. That determination, that strength of character. You had everything it took to run this empire. Leon's voice came out hoarse. You made my mother sick. Your affairs, your cruelty. She died of a broken heart. Richard's jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. She's the one who left me. Moved to France, abandoned everything we'd built. His voice hardened. Then Claire came into my life. Smart, beautiful, logical. I couldn't resist her. A muscle ticked in his cheek. But she was planning to betray me. So you killed her. Leon's words were flat, lifeless. You killed your own daughter's mother. Richard's chin lifted, defiant. I didn't know she was inside. I only wanted to destroy the evidence she was going to hand over to the FBI. Her death was an accident. An accident? Leon laughed, a hollow, broken sound. An accident you dragged me into. I was so young, so desperate to please you. I would have done anything you asked. Back in Richmond, Pia stared at her aunt's tear-streaked face. Is there something you're not telling me? Her voice trembled. Is Richard Martin my father? The tears wouldn't stop. They burned tracks down her cheeks, dripped off her chin. This couldn't be happening. He couldn't be her father. Because if he was, Leon would be her brother. Margaret was crying too, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. I'm not certain, Pia. It's possible. Your mother never told me. She gave you her own last name, never put a father on the birth certificate. She reached for Pia's hand, gripping it tight. But 6 months after Claire died, money started appearing in my account, every month, like clockwork. I spent 2 years trying to trace it. Pia's breath caught. Where did it come from? France. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. An anonymous account. The transfers were set up so I couldn't return the money even if I wanted to. I didn't touch it for years, 5 years, maybe more. But eventually I started using it for your education, your expenses. She squeezed Pia's fingers. I always assumed it was your father, whoever he was, watching over you from a distance, unwilling to reveal himself. I had to keep you away from me, from my family. The memory of Leon's words crashed through her like a wave. He'd kept his distance, pushed her away, then pulled her close. How could he do this to her? The nausea hit without warning. Pia lurched to her feet, stumbling toward the bathroom. She gripped the sink, splashing cold water on her face, gasping for air. Derek's betrayal hadn't hurt like this. Nothing had ever hurt like this. She stared at her reflection, pale, red-eyed, shattered, and felt something inside her break. How could you do this, Leon? Back in New York, Richard's fist slammed against his desk. He jabbed a finger at Leon, his voice rising to something close to a roar. You are my son, no matter what some blood test might say. His chest heaved, veins bulging at his temples. 20 years you've been running from me. 20 years! He swept his arm across the room. The mahogany furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond. This empire is yours. Everything I built, everything I bled for, it belongs to you. His voice dropped, taking on an edge of desperation. And yes, I want you to take care of Pia. I've watched her from a distance all these years. You provided the money. I handled the rest. A cold smile twisted his lips. Anyone who hurt her, I made them pay. That Derek bastard? I burned his career to the ground. He won't find decent work anywhere in this country. Leon stared at him, revulsion crawling up his spine. Pia is the only person I would ever entrust to you, Richard continued, his voice softening. You're the only one worthy of her. Leon shook his head slowly, disbelief etched into every line of his face. You planned all of this? From the beginning? His hands curled into fists. Why did Dominic go after Pia? What did he tell her? Richard waved dismissively. Your brother made a mistake. Jealousy, nothing more. He'll pay for it. No. Leon rose to his feet, his voice steady now, cold as steel. No, father. I won't be part of your filthy games. I spent 20 years trying to stay away from this world. I'm not coming back now. He moved toward the door, then stopped, his back rigid. And Pia. His voice cracked, just barely. I'm going to stay away from her. Let her live her life. She deserves better. He turned, meeting Richard's eyes one final time. I'm not worthy of her, and neither are you. Richard's face contorted with rage. Leon! Don't contact me again. Leon's hand closed around the door handle. You've destroyed enough of my life. Stay away from Pia. I mean it. He walked out. Behind him, Richard's voice thundered through the corridor, echoing off the marble walls. That's not how the world works, Leon. You think you're some kind of justice dispenser, punishing all three of us to clear your guilty conscience? The elevator doors closed, cutting off his father's voice. Leon leaned against the cold metal wall, his legs barely holding him. His reflection stared back, hollow-eyed, shattered. He'd lost everything. and the woman he loved would never forgive him. Snow drifted past the frosted windows of Margaret's winter garden. Inside, Pia hunched over a makeshift workstation, glass vials, copper alembics, scattered notes. Her hair hung in a thick braid over one shoulder, and the oversized sweatshirt she wore had belonged to her mother once. 6 months of silence. Phone off, social media deleted, every number blocked except Margaret's. The perfume sat before her in a crystal flacon. 90% complete, technically flawless, utterly wrong. She lifted the stopper and inhaled. Bergamot and neroli on top, rose and jasmine in the heart. The rare Turkish musk from Istanbul anchoring the base. Every molecule calibrated to trigger oxytocin, suppress cortisol, balance serotonin. The science was sound. But when she sprayed it on her wrist and closed her eyes, she felt nothing. No transformation, no alchemy, no bridge between grief and desire. Just expensive chemistry pretending to be magic. Pia pressed her palms against her eyes until stars burst behind her lids. The same wall, every night, the same question. How do you turn pain into love? Outside, the snow fell harder. Across the street, hidden in the shadow of a bare oak, a man stood motionless. Leon Martin had been there for 3 hours, long enough for snow to collect on his shoulders, his beard, 6 months of neglect to gather ice crystals. He watched her through the greenhouse glass, watched her lift the perfume, inhale, set it down in defeat. His chest ached with a pain no cold could match. I would give anything to touch you right now. He could cross that street in 30 seconds, knock on the door, fall at her feet and beg forgiveness. But then what? Drag her back into his father's world? Watch the light in her eyes die the way it had died in his mother's, in Claire's? I can't sacrifice you for this. His hands curled into fists, knuckles white. I can't hurt you. Not again. 4 times in 6 months he'd come to Richmond, always at night, always from a distance, always leaving before dawn with nothing but the memory of her silhouette. This was his penance, watching over her like a ghost, protecting her from the only real threat she faced, himself. The snow kept falling. Pia kept working, and Leon stood in the darkness, frozen in every way that mattered, loving her enough to stay away. The chateau had become a tomb. Leon sat in the West Wing study, unshaven and hollow-eyed, the same clothes he'd worn for 3 days hanging loose on his thinning frame. Claire's leather journal lay open on the desk before him. Beside it, a faded T-shirt, the one Pia had slept in, forgotten in her rush to escape Istanbul. He'd found it folded on his bathroom floor. 6 months later, it still carried traces of her scent. Soft musk, warm skin, her. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept through the night, couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten a full meal. The atelier stood untouched, the perfume abandoned mid-formula, and he spent his days here, in this room full of ghosts, punishing himself with memories. The door opened without a knock. Helene crossed the room and set a cup of tea on the desk, her eyes taking in the mess, the empty bottles, the scattered papers, the man she'd watched grow from a wounded boy into something even more broken. Leon, her voice was soft but firm. You're torturing yourself. He didn't look up from the T-shirt. Helene's gaze fell on the journal, its pages soft from handling. She knew what it contained. She'd been there 20 years ago when the package arrived from New York, had watched Leon read Claire's final words and collapse into grief. Give it to her. Her voice was gentle but firm. The journal. Pia deserves to know. Leon's jaw tightened. She'll hate me. She already hates you. Helene sat down across from him, her weathered hands folded in her lap. You've given her silence for 6 months. What do you have to lose? Leon said nothing. His fingers closed around the worn fabric of Pia's shirt. Helene waited. When no answer came, she rose quietly and left the room. That night, after Leon had finally fallen into fitful sleep on the study couch, Helene returned. She moved silently through the darkness, lifted Claire's journal from the desk, and tucked it into a padded envelope. She found the address on a torn envelope in Leon's desk drawer. Margaret Chamberlain, Richmond, Virginia. Some decisions were too important to leave to broken men. Margaret found her in the winter garden, hunched over the same failed formula. "This came for you." She set the opened package on the workbench. French postmark, no return address. "I'll leave you alone." Pia pulled out a leather journal, worn soft at the edges, her mother's handwriting on the first page. Her heart stopped. All this time? You had this, Leon? She turned the pages with shaking hands. Formulas, notes, sketches of molecular structures, her mother's elegant script filling margin after margin. A perfume project, unfinished, abandoned 20 years ago. An hour later, it clicked. The bass notes, the structure, the impossible goal of transmuting grief into desire. This was the perfume, the same one Leon had been trying to create in Grasse, the same one she'd been failing at for 6 months. Her mother's unfinished work. Leon had been trying to complete it. Rage flooded through her, hot and blinding. "You selfish bastard! You knew about this the whole time. You let me struggle, let me fail, and you never said a word. How could you keep this from me?" Suddenly, flipping through the final pages, a folded letter slipped out, yellowed with age, her mother's handwriting, for Leon. Pia unfolded the yellowed paper with trembling fingers. "Dear Leon, you were 13 when you first walked into my lab. I've always thought of you as my own son. I know scents remind you of your mother. I know how talented you are. Leon, I want you to have this journal. If anything happens to me, I've arranged for it to go to your mother's place in France. These formulas should stay with you. Someday, my daughter Pia might choose this path. She has the gift. She can read emotions through scent, just like me. When the time comes, give her this journal and watch over her. You're a good kid, Leon. You don't carry your father's darkness. Maybe you'll carve out a different path for yourself. Maybe you'll be the one to finish that perfume, the one that eases pain, Claire." The letter slipped from Pia's fingers. Her mother knew Leon, trusted him with her most precious work, but why? Why him? And why didn't she write, "She's I, your sister"? If Richard was Pia's father, Claire would have known. She would have warned Leon, unless... The questions crashed through her mind like waves. Leon had been watching over her for years, paid for her education, kept his distance until Grasse, because her mother asked him to. Pia sank into the chair, legs giving out beneath her. "Leon, what else haven't you told me?" Margaret appeared in the doorway. She saw Pia trembling and rushed to her side. "Sweetheart, what happened?" Pia held out the letter. She couldn't speak. Margaret read it, slowly, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, sweetie," she whispered. "Leon, all this time, I think he protected me." Pia's voice broke. "He couldn't save my mother, but he tried to protect me." Margaret opened her arms. Pia fell into them, sobbing, years of grief pouring out. And for the first time in 6 months, the ice around her heart began to crack. 3 weeks after the letter, Pia finally understood. She'd been studying her mother's notes obsessively, cross-referencing them with Leon's additions, testing variation after variation in her tiny winter garden lab. The formula was brilliant: bergamot to calm the nerves, rose and jasmine to open the heart, musk to awaken desire. Every ingredient chosen to guide the brain from grief toward love. But it didn't work. Not for Claire, not for Leon, not for her. Tonight, exhausted and red-eyed, she read through Leon's failed attempts for the 100th time. 20 years of notes, 20 years of trying. And suddenly, she saw what she'd missed. He wasn't making this perfume for the world. He was making it for himself. The realization hit her like a punch to the chest. Leon had lost his mother at 10, watched Claire die at 20, spent 2 decades carrying guilt so heavy it had crushed something inside him. If I can turn pain into love, she imagined him thinking, maybe I can finally forgive myself. But that was the problem. You can't forgive what you won't feel. Pia set down the journal and stared at nothing. In Istanbul, she'd been able to read him for the first time. In the jacuzzi, after they'd made love, his walls had crumbled and she'd finally smelled the truth. His feelings were real. He loved her. But before that, nothing. A blank space where emotions should have been. She'd thought he was unreadable, special, different. Now she understood. He wasn't hiding his feelings from her. He'd hidden them from himself. For 20 years, Leon had locked his grief away so deep that even his own body couldn't betray him. No pheromones, no emotional scent, nothing for her gift to detect. And that's why the perfume never worked. You can't transform pain into love if you've forgotten how to feel pain in the first place. The missing ingredient wasn't a molecule. It wasn't some rare flower from Turkey or a secret oil from Grasse. It was simpler than that, and harder. The perfume needed someone willing to feel everything, the grief, the guilt, the love, all of it, without armor, without walls. Claire had known this. That's why she'd written, "Maybe you'll be the one to finish it." Not because Leon was talented, because Leon was broken in exactly the right way, if he ever found the courage to let himself break completely. Pia closed the journal. She knew what she had to do. The morning sun was doing its best to melt the last of the snow. Pia sat on a park bench across from Margaret's house, watching the white turn to slush, thinking about Leon. A black SUV pulled up to the curb. She didn't move, didn't run. Something in her gut already knew. The man who stepped out was in his 60s, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. He walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps, the walk of someone who'd never had to rush for anything in his life. Pia's hands curled into fists on her lap. He sat down beside her. Not too close, respectful of the space between them. She couldn't look at him. Not yet. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she kept her eyes fixed on the melting snow. Finally, she turned. His face held a bittersweet smile, lines of age, lines of grief, eyes that looked too much like her own. "This is the first time I've seen you up close, my dear girl." His voice was low, almost gentle. "You've grown into a beautiful young woman. No wonder Leon fell in love with you." Pia swallowed hard. The name scraped out of her throat like broken glass. "Richard Martin." He nodded slowly. "So you know." Her eyes burned with rage. "You killed my mother." Richard's head dropped. He stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "No, I never intended to hurt Claire." His voice cracked, just barely. "The truth is, I loved her. But that night was a disaster, in every way." He paused, gathering himself. "When I found out she'd made a deal with the FBI, I had to destroy the evidence. I was going to keep Claire safe. We had a daughter together, a daughter she named after my mother." He glanced at Pia. "You." But Claire was stubborn, independent. She decided to do what she thought was right. Tears slid down Pia's cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "What does Leon have to do with this?" Richard continued, his gaze distant. "That night I invited Claire to dinner. I needed her away from the lab. I sent my men to handle things, and I sent Leon." Something cold spread through Pia's chest. "Leon didn't want to go. He'd spent so much time in that lab. Claire was like a mentor to him, a mother almost. I convinced him by saying I'd go to prison if he didn't help, that we'd lose everything." Richard's jaw tightened. "But when the fire started, Claire still hadn't shown up for dinner. That's when I knew something was wrong. I called Leon and told him she might be inside." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "He went insane, ran straight into the burning building to find her, but by the time he reached her, it was too late. Claire was gone, and Leon spent 4 months in the hospital with severe burns." Richard turned to face her fully. "That night, I lost the woman I loved. I lost my son, and I lost my daughter." Pia stared at the sky, fighting to control her breathing. The question burned in her throat. "Is Leon my brother?" "No, Pia." Richard's voice was firm. "He's my first wife's son, but Leon didn't know that until 6 months ago, and he didn't know you were my daughter either." A sob escaped her chest. Relief flooded through her veins like warm water. "Why are you telling me this now? Why not before?" She turned to him, eyes blazing. "What do you want from me?" Richard smiled, a sad, tired smile. I want you to make the right choice. For yourself. And for Leon. He rose slowly from the bench. He's so determined to protect you from himself that someone needed to set the record straight. He looked down at her. You're my daughter, Pia. Believe it or not, I loved your mother, and I've kept my distance because that's what she wanted. She didn't think this life was right for you. I honored her wishes. He took 2 steps toward the SUV, then stopped. You know where to find me if you ever need anything, and you know where to find Leon. He began to walk away, then turned one last time. By the way, I'm proud of you. The SUV door closed, the engine hummed, and Richard Martin disappeared down the street, leaving Pia alone on the bench with tears streaming down her face and something new blooming in her chest. Hope. The March sun hung low over grass, warm enough to hint at spring, but carrying a cool edge that prickled against Pia's skin. She stood at the chateau gates, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The crystal bottle was cool in her palm. She uncapped it, pressed a single drop to the pulse point at the base of her throat, right where Leon always buried his face. The scent rose around her like a promise. Memory made liquid, pain transformed into beauty. She walked to the door. Helene opened it before she could knock. The older woman's face crumpled into a smile, eyes glistening. Pia, her voice caught. Finally, you're here? She gestured toward the atelier with a knowing tilt of her head, said nothing more. Pia crossed the courtyard, her hair lifting in the breeze, dark waves brushing against her shoulders. Each step felt like walking through water, slow, deliberate, inevitable. The atelier door stood open. Leon was inside, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the pale blue of his shirt a stark contrast against his tanned forearms. He was bent over the workbench, shoulders tense, completely still. She stepped through the doorway. He looked up. Their eyes collided like a physical blow. The air between them crackled, charged with 6 months of silence, 6 months of longing, 6 months of words neither of them had been brave enough to say. Those impossible blue-green eyes locked onto hers with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unspoken. Pia. Her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer, rough with longing, thick with something that might have been pain or desire, or both twisted together until they were indistinguishable. She moved toward him, slowly, watching the way his chest rose and fell, the way his hands gripped the edge of the workbench like he was holding himself back. She reached him, slid her arms around his neck, pressed her face into the curve where his shoulder met his throat, and breathed him in. No cologne, no fragrance. Just him, the raw, warm scent of his skin, clean sweat and sun-warmed flesh, and something underneath that was purely, unmistakably, Leon. She inhaled deeply, letting his essence fill her lungs, her blood, her bones. His arms came around her, tentative at first, then crushing. His face buried in her hair, her neck, drinking her in the same way she was drinking him. His breath shuddered against her skin. Then he went still. She felt the moment he recognized it, the perfume, her creation, the formula they'd chased together through those weeks in this very room. He pulled back just enough to look at her, wonder and devastation warring in his eyes. She cupped his face in her hands, let him see everything, the forgiveness, the understanding, the love she'd carried across an ocean to lay at his feet. I came to ease your pain, my love. Something broke behind his eyes, a wall crumbling, 20 years of guilt dissolving in the space between one breath and the next. He kissed her, not gentle, not careful. His mouth claimed hers with a desperation that bordered on violence, hands fisting in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. She gasped against his lips, and he swallowed the sound, tongue sweeping into her mouth like he was trying to taste her soul. His hands found her waist, lifted. She was on the workbench before she could think, legs wrapping around him instinctively, pulling him into the cradle of her thighs. Pia. Her name again, broken this time, whispered against her jaw, her throat, the pulse hammering beneath her skin. "I thought I'd lost you." "Never." She arched into him, fingers working the buttons of his shirt. "You could never lose me." The afternoon light spilled golden through the windows as he laid her back among the scattered papers and crystal vials, as her perfume rose around them both, memory and desire, pain and healing, all of it tangled together in the spring air. And finally, they came home to each other. Black envelopes began appearing on doorsteps across 3 continents. No return address, no sender, just a single line in silver ink: "You are invited to remember." The invitations offered no venue, no time, no fragrance name, only coordinates that changed every 6 hours. 200 of the most powerful names in fashion, art, and luxury received them. The industry lost its mind. A 19th-century glass conservatory, a hidden courtyard in Paris, Le Marais, jasmine climbing the iron bones of the structure, candles flickering in the April dusk, 200 guests in evening wear, but no cameras, no phones, no press were permitted beyond the threshold. At each place setting, a single crystal vial, thumb-sized, unmarked, and at the head of the room, Pia in ivory silk, Leon in black beside her, his palm warm against the small of her back. There were no speeches, no introductions, just one instruction on cream-colored cards. Close your eyes. Breathe. Remember, 200 vials uncapped in unison, 200 breaths drawn deep, and then silence. Complete, absolute silence. A woman in the front row closed her eyes and her lips parted, not quite a smile, but the beginning of one, as if she'd glimpsed something she'd forgotten was possible. Beside her, a silver-haired man exhaled slowly, his shoulders softening. He whispered something, a name maybe, and nodded to himself, as though making peace with a memory he'd been fighting for years. Across the room, a young designer pressed the vial to her wrist and went still. When she opened her eyes, they were wet, but her expression held no sorrow. Something had shifted, something small but real. An older woman touched her throat where the scent lingered and breathed. I think I can let it go now." A man in his 60s stood, walked to the window and simply breathed, deeper than he had in years. The perfume didn't erase their pain. It transformed it, into hope, into desire, into the fierce, aching need to live and love again. The conservatory filled with the soft sounds of 200 people breathing differently than they had when they walked in. Not healed, healing was a journey, not a moment, but something had cracked open, a window, a possibility. Pia watched it all, and her throat tightened. This is real. This is happening. 28 years of being invisible, of being one of 200 noses at a company that never learned her name, of creating formulas that ended up with someone else's signature on them, watching her work launch under another perfumer's credit while she mixed samples in a back room. And now 200 of the most powerful people in the world were holding something she had created, something with her name on it, something born from her mother's lost formula, her own grief, and the impossible love of a man who had seen her when no one else could. "Mom, can you see this?" Her chest ached with a sweetness she couldn't name. This was what she was made for. Not a perfume, a bridge. Between pain and hope, between the past and the courage to want a future. Leon's fingers intertwined with hers. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Then he raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried through the stunned silence, "I present to you Memoir de Peau, created by Pia Chamberlain." He paused, his gaze finding hers. "My future wife." The room erupted, gasps, applause, camera flashes from somewhere. Someone had smuggled a phone past security. Within minutes, the photos hit social media. Within hours, they'd gone viral. Within days, the perfume world would never be the same. But in that moment, Pia heard none of it. She only heard Leon's heartbeat against her ear as he pulled her close. She only smelled him. Warm skin, no cologne, just him. She only felt his whisper against her temple. You turned their pain into hope, my love, into the joy of being alive. Thank you so much for staying with Pia and Leon's story until the very end. If this touched your heart, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. It means the world to me. You know. Scent is the only sense that opens a door straight into memory. One breath and suddenly you're somewhere else. Someone else. Feeling something you thought you'd forgotten. So I want to ask you, if one single scent could take you back in time, just for a moment, what would it be? And who or where would it bring you back to? I'll read every single comment, I promise. Your stories matter to me. Until the next story, take care of your heart and the memories it holds.